furnishes the material for its development. See in the pronios of the Temple of Wisdom. The purpose of alchemy was not to make something out of nothing, but rather to fertilize and nurture the seed which was already present. Its process did not actually create gold, but rather made the ever-present seed of gold grow and flourish. Everything which exists has a spirit, the seed of divinity within itself, and regeneration is not the process of attempting to place something where it previously had not existed. Regeneration actually means the unfoldment of the omnipresent divinity in man, that this divinity may shine forth as a sun and illumine all with whom it comes in contact. The Midnight Sun. Apuleius said when describing his initiation, vid ante, "At midnight I saw the sun shining with a splendid light." The midnight sun was also a part of the mystery of alchemy. It symbolized the spirit in man shining through the darkness of his human organisms. It also referred to the spiritual sun in the solar system, which the mystic could see as well, at midnight as at high noon, the material earth being powerless to obstruct the rays of this divine orb. The mysterious lights which illuminated the temples of the Egyptian mysteries during the nocturnal hours were said by some to be reflections of the spiritual sun gathered by the magical powers of the priests. The weird light seen 10 miles below the surface of the earth by I Am the Man in that remarkable Masonic allegory at Adorpa, Aphrodite spelt backward, may well refer to the mysterious midnight sun of the ancient rites. Primitive conceptions concerning the warfare between the principles of good and evil were often based upon the alternations of day and night. During the Middle Ages, the practices of black magic were confined to the nocturnal hours, and those who served the spirit of evil were called black magicians, while those who served the spirit of good were called white magicians. Black and white were associated respectively with night and day, and the endless conflict of light and shadow is alluded to many times in the mythologies of various peoples. The Egyptian demon, Typhon, was symbolized as part crocodile and part hog because these animals are gross and earthy in both appearance and temperament. Since the world began, living things have feared the darkness. Those few creatures who use it as a shield for their maneuvers were usually connected with the spirit of evil. Consequently, cats, bats, toads, and owls are associated with witchcraft. In certain parts of Europe, it is still believed that, at night, black magicians assume the bodies of wolves and roam around destroying. From this notion originated the stories of the werewolves. Serpents, because they lived in the earth, were associated with the spirit of darkness. As the battle between good and evil centers around the use of generative forces of nature, winged serpents represent the regeneration of the animal nature of man, or those great ones in whom this regeneration is complete. Among the Egyptians, the sun's rays are often shown ending in human hands. Masons will find a connection between these hands and the well-known paw of the lion, which raises all things to life with its grip. Solar colors. The theory so long held of 3 primary and 4 secondary colors is purely exoteric, for since the earliest periods, it has been known that there are 7, and not 3, primary colors, the human eye being capable of estimating only 3 of them. Thus, although green can be made by combining blue and yellow, there is also a true or primary green, which is not a compound. This can be proved by breaking up the spectrum with a prism. Helmholtz found that the so-called secondary colors of the spectrum could not be broken up into their supposed primary colors. Thus, the orange of the spectrum, if passed through a second prism, does not break up into red and yellow, but remains orange. Consciousness, intelligence, and force are fittingly symbolized by the colors blue, yellow, and red. The therapeutic effects of the colors, moreover, are in harmony with this concept, for blue is a fine, soothing electrical color, yellow a vitalizing and refining color, and red an agitating and heat-giving color. It has also been demonstrated that minerals and plants affect the human constitution according to their colors. Thus, a yellow flower generally yields a medicine that affects the constitution in a manner similar to yellow light, or the musical tone, mi. An orange flower will influence in a manner similar to orange light, and, being one of the so-called secondary colors, corresponds either to the tone re or to the chord of do and mi. The ancients conceived the spirit of man to correspond with the color blue, the mind with yellow, and the body with red. Heaven is therefore blue, earth yellow, and hell, or the underworld, red. The fiery condition of the inferno merely symbolizes the nature of the sphere or plane of force of which it is composed. In the Greek mysteries, the irrational sphere was always considered as red, for it represented that condition in which the consciousness is enslaved by the lusts and passions of the lower nature. In India, certain of the gods, usually attributes of Vishnu, are depicted with blue skin to signify their divine and supermundane constitution. According to esoteric philosophy, blue is the true and sacred color of the sun. The apparent orange-yellow shade of this orb is the result of its rays being immersed in the substances of the illusionary world. In the original symbolism of the Christian Church, colors were of first importance, and their use was regulated according to carefully prepared rules. Since the Middle Ages, however, the carelessness with which colors have been employed has resulted in the loss of their deeper emblematic meanings. In its primary aspect, white or silver signified life, purity, innocence, joy, and light. Red, the suffering and death of Christ and his saints, and also divine love, blood, and warfare, or suffering. Blue, the heavenly sphere and the states of godliness and contemplation. Yellow or gold, glory, fruitfulness, and goodness. Green, fecundity, youthfulness, and prosperity. Violet, humility, deep affection, and sorrow. Black, death, destruction, and humiliation. In early church art, the colors of robes and ornaments also revealed whether a saint had been martyred, as well as the character of the work that he had done to deserve canonization. In addition to the colors of the spectrum, there are a vast number of vibratory color waves, some too low and others too high to be registered by the human optical apparatus. It is appalling to contemplate man's colossal ignorance concerning these vistas of abstract space. As in the past man explored unknown continents, so in the future, armed with curious implements fashioned for the purpose, he will explore these little-known vastnesses of light, color, sound, and consciousness. The solar face, from Montfaucon's Antiquities. The corona of the sun is here shown in the form of a lion's mane. This is a subtle reminder of the fact that, at one time, the summer solstice took place in the sign of Leo, the celestial lion. The zodiac and its signs. It is difficult for this age to estimate correctly the profound effect produced upon the religions, philosophies, and sciences of antiquity by the study of the planets, luminaries, and constellations. Not without adequate reason were the Magi of Persia called the stargazers. The Egyptians were honored with a special appellation because of their proficiency in computing the power and motion of the heavenly bodies and their effect upon the destinies of nations and individuals. Ruins of primitive astronomical observatories have been discovered in all parts of the world, although, in many cases, modern archaeologists are unaware of the true purpose for which these structures were erected. While the telescope was unknown to ancient astronomers, they made many remarkable calculations with instruments cut from blocks of granite or pounded from sheets of brass and copper. In India, such instruments are still in use, and they possess a high degree of accuracy. In Jaipur, Rajputana, India, an observatory consisting largely of immense stone sundials is still in operation. The famous Chinese observatory on the wall of Peking consists of immense bronze instruments, including a telescope in the form of a hollow tube without lenses. The pagans looked upon the stars as living things, capable of influencing the destinies of individuals, nations, and races. That the early Jewish patriarchs believed that the celestial bodies participated in the affairs of men is evident to any student of biblical literature, as, for example, in the book of Judges. They fought from heaven, even the stars in their courses fought against Sisera. The Chaldeans, Phoenicians, Egyptians, Persians, Hindus, and Chinese all had zodiacs that were much alike in general character, and different authorities have credited each of these nations with being the cradle of astrology and astronomy. The Central and North American Indians also had an understanding of the zodiac, but the patterns and numbers of the signs differed in many details from those of the Eastern Hemisphere. The word zodiac is derived from the Greek zodiakos, which means a circle of animals, or, as some believe, little animals. It is the name given by the old pagan astronomers to a band of fixed stars about 16 degrees wide, apparently encircling the Earth. Robert Hewitt Brown, 32nd degree, states that the Greek word zodiakos comes from zoon, meaning an animal. He adds, this latter word is compounded directly from the primitive Egyptian radicals zo, life, and an, a being. The Greeks and later other peoples influenced by their culture divided the band of the zodiac into 12 sections, each being 16 degrees in width and 30 degrees in length. These divisions were called the houses of the zodiac. The sun, during its annual pilgrimage, passed through each of these in turn. Imaginary creatures were traced in the star groups bounded by these rectangles, and because most of them were animal or part animal in form, they later became known as the constellations, or signs, of the zodiac. There is a popular theory concerning the origin of the zodiacal creatures to the effect that they were products of the imagination of shepherds, who, watching their flocks at night, occupied their minds by tracing the forms of animals and birds in the heavens. This theory is untenable, unless the shepherds be regarded as the shepherd priests of antiquity. It is unlikely that the zodiacal signs were derived from the star groups which they now represent. It is far more probable that the creatures assigned to the 12 houses are symbolic of the qualities and intensity of the sun's power, while it occupies different parts of the zodiacal belt. On this subject, Richard Payne Knight writes, the emblematical meaning which certain animals were employed to signify was only some particular property generalized, and therefore might easily be invested or discovered by the natural operation of the mind. But the constellations of stars, named after certain animals, have no resemblance whatsoever to those animals, which are therefore merely signs of convention adopted to distinguish certain proportions of the heavens, which were probably consecrated to those particular personified attributes which they respectively represented, the symbolical language of ancient art and mythology. Some authorities are of the opinion that the zodiac was originally divided into 10 instead of 12 houses, or solar mansions. In early times, there were two separate standards, one solar and the other lunar, used for the measurement of the months, years, and seasons. The solar year was composed of 10 months of 36 days each, and 5 days sacred to the gods. The lunar year consisted of 13 months of 28 days each, with 1 day left over. The solar zodiac, at that time, consisted often houses of 36 degrees each. The first 6 signs of the zodiac of 12 signs were regarded as benevolent because the sun occupied them while traversing the northern hemisphere. The 6,000 years during which, according to the Persians, Ahura Mazda ruled his universe in harmony and peace were symbolic of these 6 signs. The second 6 were considered malevolent because while the sun was traveling the southern hemisphere, it was winter with the Greeks, Egyptians, and Persians. Therefore, these 6 months, symbolic of the 6,000 years of misery and suffering, caused by the evil genius of the Persians, Ahriman, who sought to overthrow the power of Ahura Mazda. Those who hold the opinion that, before its revision by the Greeks, the zodiac consisted of only 10 signs, adduce evidence to show that Libra, the scales, was inserted into the zodiac by dividing the constellation of Virgo Scorpia, at that time 1 sign, into 2 parts, thus establishing the balance at the point of equilibrium between the ascending northern and the descending southern signs. See The Rosicrucians, Their Rites and Mysteries, by Hargrave Jennings. On this subject, Isaac Meyer states, we think that the zodiacal constellations were first 10 and represented an immense androgenic man or deity. Subsequently, this was changed, resulting in Scorpio and Virgo making 11. After this, from Scorpio, Libra, the balance, was taken, making the present 12. The Kabbalah. Chart showing the relationship between the human body and the exterior universe. From Kircher's Oedipus Aegypticus. The ornamental border contains groups of names of animal, mineral, and vegetable substances. Their relationship to corresponding parts of the human body is shown by the dotted lines. The words in capital letters on the dotted lines indicate to what corporeal member, organ, or disease the herb or other substance is related. The favorable positions in relation to the time of the year are shown by the signs of the zodiac, each house of which is divided by crosses into its 3 decans. This influence is further emphasized by the series of planetary signs placed on either side of the figure. Each year the sun passes entirely around the zodiac and returns to the point from which it started, the vernal equinox, and each year it falls just a little short of making the complete circle of the heavens in the allotted period of time. As a result, it crosses the equator just a little behind the spot in the zodiacal sign where it crossed the previous year. Each sign of the zodiac consists of 30 degrees, and as the sun loses about 1 degree every 72 years, it regresses through one entire constellation, or sign, in approximately 2,160 years, and through the entire zodiac in about 25,920 years. Authorities disagree concerning these figures. This retrograde motion is called the precession of the equinoxes. This means that in the course of about 25,920 years, which constitute one great solar or platonic year, each one of the 12 constellations occupies a position at the vernal equinox for nearly 2,160 years, then gives place to the previous sign. Among the ancients, the sun was always symbolized by the figure and nature of the constellation through which it passed at the vernal equinox. For nearly the past 2,000 years, the sun has crossed the equator at the vernal equinox in the constellation of Pisces, the 2 fishes. For the 2,160 years before that, it crossed through the constellation of Aries, the ram. Prior to that, the vernal equinox was in the sign of Taurus, the bull. It is probable that the form of the bull and the bull's proclivities were assigned to this constellation because the bull was used by the ancients to plow the fields, and the season set aside for plowing and furrowing corresponded to the time at which the sun reached the segment of the heavens named Taurus. Albert Pike describes the reverence which the Persians felt for this sign and the method of astrological symbolism in vogue among them thus. In Zoroaster's cave of initiation, the sun and planets were represented, overhead, in gems and gold, as was also the zodiac. The sun appeared, emerging from the back of Taurus. In the constellation of the bull are also to be found the 7 sisters, the sacred Pleiades, famous to Freemasonry as the 7 stars at the upper end of the sacred ladder. In ancient Egypt, it was during this period, when the vernal equinox was in the sign of Taurus, that the bull, Apis, was sacred to the sun god, who was worshipped through the animal equivalent of the celestial sign which he had impregnated with his presence at the time of its crossing into the northern hemisphere. This is the meaning of an ancient saying that the celestial bull broke the egg of the year with its horns. Sampson Arnold Mackay, in his Mythological Astronomy of the Ancients Demonstrated, makes note of 2 very interesting points concerning the bull in Egyptian symbolism. Mr. Mackay is of the opinion that the motion of the earth that we know as the alteration of the poles has resulted in a great change of relative position of the equator and the zodiacal band. He believes that originally the band of the zodiac was at right angles to the equator, with the sign of Cancer opposite the North Pole and the sign of Capricorn opposite the South Pole. It is possible that the Orphic symbol of the serpent twisted around the egg attempts to show the motion of the sun in relation to the earth under such conditions. Mr. Mackay advances the labyrinth of Crete, the name Abraxas, and the magic formula abracadabra, among other things, to substantiate his theory. Concerning abracadabra, he states, "But the slow progressive disappearance of the bull is most happily commemorated in the vanishing series of letters so emphatically expressive of the great astronomical fact. For abracadabra is the bull, the only bull. The ancient sentence split into its component part stands thus: abracadabra, i.e., Aber the bull, Akkad, the only. Akkad is one of the names of the sun, given him in consequence of his shining alone. He is the only star to be seen when he is seen. The remaining Abra makes the whole to be the bull, the only bull. While the repetition of the name omitting a letter, till all is gone, is the most simple yet the most satisfactory method that could have been devised to preserve the memory of the fact, and the name of Sorapis or Serapis given to the bull at the above ceremony puts it beyond all doubt. This word, abracadabra, disappears in 11 decreasing stages, as in the figure. And what is very remarkable, a body with 3 heads is folded up by a serpent with 11 coils, and placed by Sorapis, and the 11 volves of the serpent form a triangle similar to that formed by the 11 diminishing lines of the abracadabra. The equinoxes and solstices. The plane of the zodiac intersects the celestial equator at an angle of approximately 23 degrees, 28 degrees. The 2 points of intersection, A and B, are called the equinoxes. Nearly every religion of the world shows traces of astrological influence. The Old Testament of the Jews, its writings overshadowed by Egyptian culture, is a mass of astrological and astronomical allegories. Nearly all the mythology of Greece and Rome may be traced in star groups. Some writers are of the opinion that the original 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet were derived from groups of stars, and that the starry handwriting on the wall of the heavens referred to words spelt out, with fixed stars for consonants and the planets or luminaries for vowels. These, coming into ever different combinations, spelt words which, when properly read, foretold future events. As the zodiacal band marks the pathway of the sun through the constellations, it results in the phenomena of the seasons. The ancient systems of measuring the year were based upon the equinoxes and the solstices. The year always began with the vernal equinox, celebrated March 21st, with rejoicing to mark the moment when the sun crossed the equator northward up the zodiacal arc. The summer solstice was celebrated when the sun reached its most northerly position, and the day appointed was June 21st. At that time the sun began to descend toward the equator, which it recrossed southbound at the autumnal equinox, September 21st. The sun reached its most southerly position at the winter solstice, December 21st. 4 of the signs of the zodiac have been permanently dedicated to the equinoxes and the solstices, and while the signs no longer correspond with the ancient constellations to which they were assigned, and from which they secured their names, they are accepted by modern astronomers as a basis of calculation. The vernal equinox is therefore said to occur in the constellation of Aries, the ram. It is fitting that, of all beasts, a ram should be placed at the head of the heavenly flock, forming the zodiacal band. Centuries before the Christian era, the pagans revered this constellation. Godfrey Higgins states, "This constellation was called the Lamb of God. He was also called the Savior, and was said to save mankind from their sins. He was always honored with the appellation of Dominus, or Lord. He was called the Lamb of God which taketh away the sins of the world. The devotees, addressing him in their litany, constantly repeated the words, O Lamb of God, that taketh away the sin of the world, have mercy upon us, grant us thy peace." Therefore, the Lamb of God is a title given to the sun, who is said to be reborn every year in the northern hemisphere in the sign of the ram, although due to the existing discrepancy between the signs of the zodiac and the actual star groups, it actually rises in the sign of Pisces. The summer solstice is regarded as occurring in Cancer, the crab, which the Egyptians called the scarab, a beetle of the family Lamelicornis, the head of the insect kingdom, and sacred to the Egyptians as the symbol of eternal life. It is evident that the constellation of the crab is represented by this peculiar creature because the sun, after passing through this house, proceeds to walk backwards or descend the zodiacal arc. Cancer is the symbol of generation, for it is the house of the moon, the great mother of all things, and the patroness of the life forces of nature. Diana, the moon goddess of the Greeks, is called the mother of the world. Concerning the worship of the feminine or maternal principle, Richard Payne Knight writes, "By attracting or heaving the waters of the ocean, she naturally appeared to be the sovereign of humidity, and by seeming to operate so powerfully upon the constitutions of women, she equally appeared to be the patroness and regulatress of nutrition and passive generation, whence she is said to have received her nymphs, or subordinate personifications, from the ocean, and is often represented by the symbol of the sea crab, an animal that has the property of spontaneously detaching from its own body any limb that has been hurt or mutilated, and reproducing another in its place. The symbolical language of ancient art and mythology. This water sign, being symbolic of the maternal principle of nature and recognized by the pagans as the origin of all life, was a natural and consistent domicile of the moon. The autumnal equinox apparently occurs in the constellation of Libra, the balances. The scales tipped, and the solar globe began its pilgrimage toward the house of winter. The constellation of the scales was placed in the zodiac to symbolize the power of choice, by means of which man may weigh one problem against another. Millions of years ago, when the human race was in the making, man was like the angels, who knew neither good nor evil. He fell into the state of knowledge of good and evil when the gods gave him the seed for the mental nature. From man's mental reactions to his environments, he distills the product of experience, which then aids him to regain his lost position, plus an individualized intelligence. Paracelsus said, "The body comes from the elements, the soul from the stars, and the spirit from God. All that the intellect can conceive of comes from the stars, the spirits of the stars, rather than the material constellations." The constellation of Capricorn, in which the winter solstice theoretically takes place, was called the House of Death, for in winter all life in the northern hemisphere was at its lowest ebb. Capricorn is a composite creature, with the head and upper body of a goat and the tail of a fish. In this constellation, the sun is least powerful in the northern hemisphere, and after passing through this constellation, it immediately begins to increase. Hence the Greeks said that Jupiter, a name of the sun god, was suckled by a goat. A new and different sidelight on zodiacal symbolism is supplied by John Cole in A Treatise on the Circular Zodiac of Tentira in Egypt. The symbol, therefore, of the goat rising from the body of a fish, Capricorn, represents with the greatest propriety the mountainous buildings of Babylon, rising out of its low and marshy situation, the two horns of the goat being emblematical of the two towns, Nineveh and Babylon, the former built on the Tigris, the latter on the Euphrates, but both subjected to one sovereignty. The period of 2,160 years required for the regression of the sun through one of the zodiacal constellations is often termed an age. According to this system, the age secured its name from the sign through which the sun passes year after year as it crosses the equator at the vernal equinox. From this arrangement are derived the terms the Taurian age, the Aryan age, the Piscean age, and the Aquarian age. During these periods or ages, religious worship takes the form of the appropriate celestial sign, that which the sun is said to assume as a personality in the same manner that a spirit assumes a body. These 12 signs are the jewels of his breastplate, and his light shines forth from them, one after the other. From a consideration of this system, it is readily understood why certain religious symbols were adopted during different ages of the Earth's history. For during the 2,160 years the sun was in the constellation of Taurus, it is said that the solar deity assumed the body of Apis, and the bull became sacred to Osiris. For details concerning the astrological ages as related to biblical symbolism, see The Message of the Stars by Max and Augusta Voss-Heindel. During the Aryan Age, the lamb was held sacred, and the priests were called shepherds. Sheep and goats were sacrificed upon altars, and a scapegoat was appointed to bear the sins of Israel. The Microcosm. From Schodas's Margarita Philosophica. The pagans believed that the zodiac formed the body of the grand man of the universe. This body, which they called the macrocosm, the great world, was divided into 12 major parts, one of which was under the control of the celestial powers, reposing in each of the zodiacal constellations. Believing that the entire universal system was epitomized in man's body, which they called the microcosm, the little world, they evolved that now familiar figure of the cut-up man in the almanac by allotting a sign of the zodiac to each of the 12 major parts of the human body. During the age of Pisces, the fish was the symbol of divinity, and the sun god fed the multitude with 2 small fishes. The frontispiece of Inman's Ancient Faiths shows the goddess Isis with a fish on her head, and the Indian savior god, Krishna, in one of his incarnations, was cast from the mouth of a fish. Not only is Jesus often referred to as the fisher of men, but as John P. Lundy writes, the word fish is an abbreviation of this whole title, Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior, and Cross, or as St. Augustine expresses it, if you join together the initial letters of the 5 Greek words, which mean Jesus, Christ, Son of God, Savior, they will make fish, in which word Christ is mystically understood, because he was able to live in the abyss of this mortality as in the depth of waters, that is, without sin. Monumental Christianity. Many Christians observe Friday, which is sacred to the Virgin, Venus, upon which day they shall eat fish and not meat. The sign of the fish was one of the earliest symbols of Christianity, and when drawn upon the sand, it informed one Christian that another of the same faith was near. Aquarius is called the sign of the water-bearer, or the man with a jug of water on his shoulder mentioned in the New Testament. This is sometimes shown as an angelic figure, supposedly androgynous, either pouring water from an urn or carrying the vessel upon his shoulder. Among Oriental peoples, a water vessel alone is often used. Edward Upham, in his History and Doctrine of Buddhism, describes Aquarius as being in the shape of a pot and of a color between blue and yellow. This sign is the single house of Saturn. When Herschel discovered the planet Uranus, sometimes called by the name of its discoverer, the second half of the sign of Aquarius was allotted to this added member of the planetary family. The water pouring from the urn of Aquarius under the name of the waters of eternal life appears many times in symbolism. So it is with all the signs. Thus the sun in its path controls whatever form of worship man offers to the supreme deity. There are 2 distinct systems of astrological philosophy. One of them, the Ptolemaic, is geocentric. The Earth is considered the center of the solar system, around which the sun, moon, and planets revolve. Astronomically, the geocentric system is incorrect, but for thousands of years it has proved its accuracy when applied to the material nature of earthly things. A careful consideration of the writings of the great occultists and a study of their diagrams reveals the fact that many of them were acquainted with another method of arranging the heavenly bodies. The other system of astrological philosophy is called the heliocentric. This posits the sun in the center of the solar system, where it naturally belongs, with the planets and their moons revolving about it. The great difficulty, however, with the heliocentric system is that, being comparatively new, there has not been sufficient time to experiment successfully and catalog the effects of its various aspects and relationships. Geocentric astrology, as its name implies, is confined to the earthy side of nature, while heliocentric astrology may be used to analyze the higher intellectual and spiritual faculties of man. The important point to be remembered is that when the sun was said to be in a certain sign of the zodiac, the ancients really meant that the sun occupied the opposite sign and cast its long ray into the house in which they enthroned it. Therefore, when it is said that the sun is in Taurus, it means, astronomically, that the sun is in the sign opposite to Taurus, which is Scorpio. This resulted in 2 distinct schools of philosophy, one geocentric and exoteric, the other heliocentric and esoteric. While the ignorant multitudes worshipped the house of the sun's reflection, which in the case described would be the bull, the wise revered the house of the sun's actual dwelling, which would be the scorpion, or the serpent, the symbol of the concealed spiritual mystery. This sign has 3 different symbols. The most common is that of a scorpion, who was called by the ancients the backbiter, being the symbol of deceit and perversion. The second and less common form of the sign is a serpent, often used by the ancients to symbolize wisdom. Probably the rarest form of Scorpio is that of an eagle. The arrangement of the stars of the constellation bears as much resemblance to a flying bird as to a scorpion. Scorpio being the sign of occult initiation. The flying eagle, the king of birds, represents the highest and most spiritual type of Scorpio, in which it transcends the venomous insect of the earth. As Scorpio and Taurus are opposite each other in the zodiac, their symbolism is often closely intermingled. The Honorable E. M. Plunkett, in Ancient Calendars and Constellations, says, "The scorpion, the constellation Scorpio of the zodiac opposed to Taurus, joins with Mithras in his attack upon the bull, and always the genii of the spring and autumn equinoxes are present in joyous and mournful attitudes." The Egyptians, the Assyrians, and the Babylonians, who knew the sun as a bull, called the zodiac a series of furrows, through which the great celestial ox dragged the plow of the sun. Hence the populace offered up sacrifice, and led through the streets magnificent steers, bedecked with flowers and surrounded with priests, dancing girls of the temple, and musicians. The philosophic elect did not participate in these idolatrous ceremonials, but advocated them as most suitable for the types of mind composing the mass of the population. These few possessed far deeper understanding, as the serpent of Scorpio upon their foreheads, the Uraeus, bore witness. The sun is often symbolized with its rays in the form of a shaggy mane. Concerning the Masonic significance of Leo, Robert Hewitt Brown, 32nd degree, has written, "On the 21st of June, when the sun arrives at the summer solstice, the constellation Leo, being but 30 degrees in advance of the sun, appears to be leading the way, and to aid by his powerful paw in lifting the sun up to the summit of the zodiacal arch. This visible connection between the constellation Leo and the return of the sun to his place of power and glory at the summit of the royal arch of heaven was the principal reason why that constellation was held in such high esteem and reverence by the ancients. The astrologers distinguished Leo as the sole house of the sun, and taught that the world was created when the sun was in that sign. The lion was adored in the east and the west by the Egyptians and the Mexicans. The chief druid of Britain was styled a lion. Stellar theology and Masonic astronomy. When the Aquarian age is thoroughly established, the sun will be in Leo, as will be noted from the explanation previously given in this chapter regarding the distinction between geocentric and heliocentric astrology. Then, indeed, will the secret religions of the world include once more the raising to initiation by the grip of the lion's paw. Lazarus will come forth. The antiquity of the zodiac is much in dispute. To contend that it originated but a mere few thousand years before the Christian era is a colossal mistake on the part of those who have sought to compile data concerning its origin. The zodiac necessarily must be ancient enough to go backward to that period when its signs and symbols coincided exactly with the positions of the constellations whose various creatures and their natural functions exemplified the outstanding features of the sun's activity during each of the 12 months. One author, after many years of deep study on the subject, believed man's concept of the zodiac to be at least 5 million years old. In all probability, it is one of the many things for which the modern world is indebted to the Atlantean or the Lemurian civilizations. About 10,000 years before the Christian era, there was a period of many ages when knowledge of every kind was suppressed, tablets destroyed, monuments torn down, and every vestige of available material concerning previous civilizations completely obliterated. Only a few copper knives, some arrowheads, and crude carvings on the walls of caves bear mute witness of those civilizations which preceded this age of destruction. Here and there a few gigantic structures have remained, which, like the strange monoliths on Easter Island, are evidence of lost arts and sciences and lost races. The human race is exceedingly old. Modern science counts its age in tens of thousands of years, occultism in tens of millions. There is an old saying that Mother Earth has shaken many civilizations from her back, and it is not beyond reason that the principles of astrology and astronomy were evolved millions of years before the first white man appeared. The Circular Zodiac of Tentira. From Cole's treatise, The Circular Zodiac of Tentira, in Egypt. The oldest circular zodiac known is the one found at Tentira, in Egypt, and now in the possession of the French government. Mr. John Cole describes this remarkable zodiac as follows. The diameter of the medallion in which the constellations are sculptured is 4 feet 9 inches, French measure. It is surrounded by another circle of much larger circumference, containing hieroglyphic characters. This second circle is enclosed in a square, whose sides are 7 feet 9 inches long. The asterisms, constituting the zodiacal constellations mixed with others, are represented in a spiral. The extremities of this spiral, after one revolution, are Leo and Cancer. Leo is no doubt at the head. It appears to be trampling on a serpent, and its tail to be held by a woman. Immediately after the lion comes the Virgin holding an ear of corn. Further on, immediately after the lion, comes the Virgin holding an ear of corn. Further on, we perceive 2 scales of a balance, above which, in a metal lion, is the figure of Harpocrates. Then follows the Scorpion and Sagittarius, to whom the Egyptians gave wings and two faces. After Sagittarius are successively placed Capricornus, Aquarius, Pisces, the Ram, the Bull, and the Twins. This zodiacal procession is, as we have already observed, terminated by Cancer, the Crab. The occultists of the ancient world had a most remarkable understanding of the principle of evolution. They recognized all life as being in various stages of becoming. They believed that grains of sand were in the process of becoming human in consciousness, but not necessarily in form. That human creatures were in the process of becoming planets, that planets were in the process of becoming solar systems, and that solar systems were in the process of becoming cosmic chains, and so on ad infinitum. One of the stages between the solar system and the cosmic chain was called the zodiac. Therefore, they taught that, at a certain time, the solar system breaks up into a zodiac. The house of the zodiac becomes the thrones for 12 celestial hierarchies, or as certain of the ancient state, 10 divine orders. Pythagoras taught that 10, or the unit of the decimal system, was the most perfect of all numbers, and he symbolized the number 10 by the lesser tetractys, an arrangement of 10 dots in the form of an upright triangle. The early stargazers, after dividing the zodiac into its houses, appointed the 3 brightest stars in each constellation to be the joint rulers of that house. Then they divided the house into 3 sections of 10 degrees each, which they called decans. These in turn were divided in half, resulting in the breaking up of the zodiac into 72 duodecans of 5 degrees each. Over each of these duodecans, the Hebrews placed a celestial intelligence, or angel, and from this system has resulted the Kabbalistic arrangement of the 72 sacred names, which correspond to the 72 flowers, knops, and almonds upon the 7-branched candlestick of the tabernacle, and the 72 men who were chosen from the 12 tribes to represent Israel. The only 2 signs not already mentioned are Gemini and Sagittarius. The constellation of Gemini is generally represented as 2 small children, who, according to the ancients, were born out of eggs, possibly the ones that the bull broke with his horns. The stories concerning Castor and Pollux, and Romulus and Remus, may be the result of amplifying the myths of these celestial twins. The symbols of Gemini have passed through many modifications. The one used by the Arabians was the peacock. 2 of the important stars in the constellation of Gemini still bear the names of Castor and Pollux. The sign of Gemini is supposed to have been the patron of phallic worship, and the 2 obelisks, or pillars, in front of temples and churches convey the same symbolism as the twins. The sign of Sagittarius consists of what the ancient Greeks called a centaur, a composite creature, the lower half of whose body was in the form of a horse, while the upper half was human. The centaur is generally known with a bow and arrow in his hands, aiming a shaft far off into the stars. Hence, Sagittarius stands for 2 distinct principles. First, it represents the spiritual evolution of man, for the human form is rising from the body of the beast. Secondly, it is the symbol of aspiration and ambition, for as the centaur aims his arrow at the stars, so every human creature aims at a higher mark than he can reach. Albert Churchward, in The Signs and Symbols of Primordial Man, sums up the influence of the zodiac upon religious symbolism in the following words. The division here is in 12 parts, the 12 signs of the zodiac, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 gates of heaven mentioned in Revelation, and 12 entrances or portals to be passed through in the Great Pyramid before finally reaching the highest degree, and 12 apostles in the Christian doctrines, and the 12 original and perfect points in Masonry. The ancients believed that the theory of man's being made in the image of God was to be understood literally. They maintained that the universe was a great organism, not unlike the human body, and that every phase and function of the universal body had a correspondence in man. The most precious key to wisdom that the priests communicated to the new initiates was what they termed the law of analogy. Therefore, to the ancients, the study of the stars was a sacred science, for they saw in the movements of these celestial bodies the ever-present activity of the infinite Father. The Pythagoreans were often undeservedly criticized for promulgating the so-called doctrine of metempsychosis, or the transmigration of souls. This concept, as circulated among the uninitiated, was merely a blind, however, to conceal a sacred truth. Greek mystics believed that the spiritual nature of man descended into material existence from the Milky Way, the seed ground of souls, through one of the 12 gates of the great zodiacal band. The spiritual nature was therefore said to incarnate in the form of the symbolic creature created by Magian stargazers to represent the various zodiacal constellations. If the spirit incarnated through the sign of Aries, it was said to be born in the body of a ram, if in Taurus, in the body of the celestial bull. All human beings were thus symbolized by 12 mysterious creatures through which the natures of which they were able to incarnate into the material world. The theory of transmigration was not applicable to the visible material body of man, but rather to the invisible, immaterial spirit wandering along the pathway of the stars and sequentially assuming in the course of evolution the forms of the sacred zodiacal animals. In the third book of the Mathesis of Julius Firmicus Maternus appears the following extract concerning the positions of the heavenly bodies at the time of the establishment of the inferior universe. According to Aesculapius, therefore, and Anubius, to whom especially the divinity Mercury committed the secrets of the astrological science, the geniture of the world is as follows. They constituted the sun in the 15th part of Leo, the moon in the 15th part of Cancer, Saturn in the 15th part of Capricorn, Jupiter in the 15th part of Sagittary, Mars in the 15th part of Scorpio, Venus in the 15th part of Libra, Mercury in the 15th part of Virgo, and the horoscope in the 15th part of Cancer. Conformably to this geniture, therefore, to these conditions of the stars, and the testimonies which they adduce in confirmation of this geniture, they are of opinion that the destinies of men, also, are disposed in accordance with the above arrangement, as may be learnt from that book of Aesculapius which is called 10,000, or an innumerable multitude of genitures, in order that nothing in the several genitures of men may be found to be discordant with the above-mentioned geniture of the world. The 7 ages of man are under control of the planets in the following order: infancy, the moon; childhood, Mercury; adolescence, Venus; maturity, the sun; middle age, Mars; advanced age, Jupiter; and decrepitude and dissolution, Saturn. Hieroglyphic plan by Hermes of the ancient zodiac, from Kircher's Oedipus Aegypticus. The inner circle contains the hieroglyphs of Hemphta, the triform and pantomorphic deity. In the 6 concentric bands surrounding the inner circle are, from within outward, 1. The numbers of the zodiacal houses in figures and also in words. 2. The modern names of the houses. 3. The Greek or Egyptian names of the Egyptian deities assigned to the houses. 4. The complete figures of these deities. 5. The ancient or the modern zodiacal signs, sometimes both. 6. The number of deacons or subdivisions of the houses. The Bembine Table of Isis. A manuscript by Thomas Taylor contains the following remarkable paragraph. Plato was initiated into the greater mysteries at the age of 49. The initiation took place in one of the subterranean halls of the Great Pyramid in Egypt. The Isaic table formed the altar, before which the divine Plato stood and received that which was always his, but which the ceremony of the mysteries enkindled and brought from its dormant state. With this ascent, after 3 days in the great hall, he was received by the Hierophant of the pyramid. The Hierophant was seen only by those who had passed the 3 days, the 3 degrees, the 3 dimensions, and given verbally the highest esoteric teachings, each accompanied with its appropriate symbol. After a further 3 months' sojourn in the halls of the pyramid, the initiate Plato was sent out into the world to do the work of the great order, as Pythagoras and Orpheus had been before him. Before the sacking of Rome in 1527, there is no historical mention of the Mensa Isaica, tablet of Isis. At that time the tablet came into possession of a certain locksmith or ironworker, who sold it at an exorbitant price to Cardinal Bembo, a celebrated antiquary, historiographer of the Republic of Venice, and afterwards librarian of St. Mark's. After his death in 1547, the Isaiah tablet was acquired by the House of Mantua, in whose museum it remained until 1630, when troops of Ferdinand II captured the city of Mantua. Several early writers on the subject have assumed that the tablet was demolished by the ignorant soldiery for the silver it contained. The assumption, however, was erroneous. The tablet fell into the hands of Cardinal Pava, who presented it to the Duke of Savoy, who in turn presented it to the King of Sardinia. When the French conquered Italy in 1797, the tablet was carried to Paris. In 1809, Alexander Lenoir, writing of the Mensa Isaiaca, said it was on exhibition at the Bibliothèque Nationale. Upon the establishment of peace between the two countries, it was returned to Italy. In his guide to northern Italy, Karl Baedeker describes the Mensa Isaiaca as being in the center of Gallery 2 in the Museum of Antiquities at Turin. A faithful reproduction of the original tablet was made in 1559 by the celebrated Aeneas Vicus of Parma, and a copy of the engraving was given to the Chancellor of the Duke of Bavaria, to the Museum of Hieroglyphics. Athanasius Kircher describes the tablet as 5 palms long and 4 wide. W. Wynne Westcott says it measures 50 by 30 inches. It was made of bronze and decorated with encaustic or smalt enamel and silver inlay. Fosbrook adds, "The figures are cut very shallow, and the contour of most of them is encircled by threads of silver. The bases upon which the figures were seated or reclined, and left blank in the prints, were of silver and are torn away." See Encyclopedia of Antiquities. The Bembine Table of Isis. Concerning the theurgic or magic sense in which the Egyptian priests exhibited in the Bembine Table of Isis the philosophy of sacrifice, rites, and ceremonies by a system of occult symbols, Athanasius Kircher writes, "The early priests believed that a great spiritual power was invoked by correct and unabridged sacrificial ceremonies. If one feature were lacking, the whole was vitiated," says Iamblichus. Hence they were most careful in all details, for they considered it absolutely essential for the entire chain of logical connections to be exactly according to ritual. Certainly, for no other reason did they prepare and prescribe for future use the manuals, as it were, for conducting the rites. They learned, too, what the first hieromancers, possessed as it were by a divine fury, devised as a system of symbolism for exhibiting their mysteries. These they placed in this tablet of Isis, before the eyes of those admitted to the sanctum sanctorum, in order to teach the nature of the gods and the prescribed forms of sacrifice. Since each of the orders of gods had its own peculiar symbols, gestures, costumes, and ornaments, they thought it necessary to observe these in the whole apparatus of worship, as nothing was more efficacious in drawing the benign attention of the deities and genii. Thus their temples, remote from the usual haunts of men, contained representations of nearly every form in nature. First, in the pavement, they symbolized the physical economy of the world, using minerals, stones, and other things suitable for ornaments, including little streams of water. The walls showed the starry world and the dome of the world of genii. In the center was the altar, to suggest the emanations of the Supreme Mind from its center. Thus the entire interior constituted a picture of the universe of worlds. The priests, in making sacrifices, wore raiment adorned with figures similar to those attributed to the gods. Their bodies were partially bare like those of the deities, and they themselves were divested of all material cares and practices, the strictest chastity. Their heads were veiled to indicate their charge of earthly things. Their heads and bodies were shaved, for they regarded hair as a useless excrescence. Upon the head they bore the same insignia as those attributed to the gods. Thus arrayed, they regarded themselves to be transformed into that intelligence with which they constantly desired to be identified. For example, in order to call down to the world the soul and spirit of the universe, they stood before the image shown in the center of our tablet, wearing the same symbols as that figure and its attendants, and offered sacrifices. By these and the accompanying singing of hymns, they believed that the infallibility drew the gods' attention to their prayer, and so they did in regard to the other regions of the tablet, believing of necessity the proper ritual properly carried out would evoke the deity desired. That this was the origin of the science of oracles is apparent, as a touched chord produces a harmony of sound. Likewise the adjoining chords respond, though not touched. Similarly, the idea they expressed by their concurrent acts while adoring the god came into accord with basic idea, and, by an intellectual union, it was returned to them deiformed, and they thus obtained the idea of ideas. Hence there sprang up in their souls, they thought, the gift of prophecy and divination, and they believed they could foretell future events, impending evils, etc. For as in the Supreme Mind everything is simultaneous and spaceless, the future is therefore present in that mind, and they thought that while the human mind was absorbed in the Supreme by contemplation, by that union they were enabled to know all the future. Nearly all that is represented in our tablet consists of amulets, which, by analogy above described, would inspire them, under the described conditions, with the virtues of the supreme power and enable them to receive good and avert evil. They also believed they could, in this magical manner, effect cures of diseases, that genii could be induced to appear to them during sleep and cure or teach them to cure the sick. In this belief, they consulted the gods about all sort of doubts and difficulties, while adorned with the simulacra of the mystic rite and intently contemplating the divine ideas. And while so enraptured, they believed the god, by some sign, nod, or gesture communicated with them, whether asleep or awake, concerning the truth or falsity of the matter in point. See Oedipus Egypticus. Those familiar with the fundamental principles of Hermetic philosophy will recognize in the Mensa Isaica the key to Chaldean, Egyptian, and Greek theology. In his Antiquities, the learned Benedictine, Father Montfaucon, admits his inability to cope with the intricacies of its symbolism. He therefore doubts that the emblems upon the tablet possess any significance worthy of consideration, and ridicules Kircher, declaring him to be more obscure than the tablet itself. Laurentius Pignorius reproduced the tablet in connection with a descriptive essay in 1605, but his timidly advanced explanations demonstrated his ignorance concerning the actual interpretation of the figures. In his Oedipus Egypticus, published in 1654, Kircher attacked the problem with characteristic avidity. Being peculiarly qualified for such a task by years of research in matters pertaining to the secret doctrines of antiquity, and with the assistance of a group of eminent scholars, Kircher accomplished much towards an exposition of the mysteries of the tablet. The master's secret, however, eluded even him, as Eliphas Levi has shrewdly noted in his History of Magic. The learned Jesuit, writes Levi, divined that it contained the hieroglyphic key to sacred alphabets, though he was unable to develop the explanation. It is divided into 3 equal compartments. Above are the 12 houses of heaven, and below are the corresponding distributions of labor, work periods, throughout the year, while in the middle place are 21 sacred signs answering to the letters of the alphabet. In the midst of all is a seated figure of the pantomorphic Aenix, emblem of universal being and corresponding as such to the Hebrew Yod, or to that unique letter from which all the other letters were formed. The Aenix is encircled by the Ophite triad, answering to the 3 mother letters of the Egyptian and Hebrew alphabets. On the right are the Ibimorphic and Serapian triads. On the left are those of Nephthys and Hecate, representing active and passive, fixed and volatile, fructifying fire and generating water. Each pair of triads in conjunction with the center produces a septenary, and a septenary is contained in the center. The 3 septenaries furnish the absolute number of the 3 worlds, as well as the complete number of primitive letters, to which a complementary sign is added, like 0 to the 9 numerals. Levy's key to the Bembeen table, from Levy's History of Magic. The Isiac table, writes Levy, is a key to the ancient Book of Thoth, which has survived to some extent the lapse of centuries and is pictured to us in the still comparatively ancient set of Tarotchi cards. To him, the Book of Thoth was a resume of the esoteric learning of the Egyptians. After the decadence of their civilization, this lore became crystallized in a hieroglyphic form as the tarot. This tarot, having become partially or entirely forgotten or misunderstood, its pictured symbols fell into the hands of the sham diviners and of the providers of the public amusement by games of cards. The modern tarot, or tarocchi pack of cards, consists of 78 cards, of which 22 form a special group of trumps of pictorial design. The remaining 56 are composed of 4 suits of 10 numerals and 4 court cards, king, queen, knight, and knave or valet. The suits are swords, militarism, cups, sacerdocy, clubs or wands, agriculture, and shekels or coins, commerce, answering respectively to our spades, hearts, clubs, and diamonds. Our purpose is with the 22 trumps. These form the special characteristic of the pack and are the lineal descendants of the hieroglyphics of the tarot. These 22 respond to the letters of the Hebrew and other sacred alphabets, which fall naturally into 3 classes of a trio of mothers, a heptad of doubles, and a duodecad of simple letters. They are also considered as a triad of heptads, and one apart, a system of initiation and an uninitiate. See Westcott's The Isaiah Tablet. Levy's hint may be construed to mean that the 21 figures in the center section of the table represent the 21 major trumps of the tarot cards. If this be so, is not the 0 card, cause of so much controversy, the nameless crown of the Supreme Mind, the crown being symbolized by the hidden triad in the upper part of the throne in the center of the table? Might not the first emanation of this Supreme Mind be well symbolized by a juggler or magician with the symbols of the 4 lower worlds spread out on the table before him? The rod, the sword, the cup, and the coin? Thus considered, the 0 card belongs nowhere among the others, but is in fact the 4th dimensional point from which they all emanated and consequently is broken up into the 21 cards, or letters, which, when gathered together, produce the 0. The cipher appearing upon this card would substantiate this interpretation, for the cipher or circle is emblematic of the superior sphere from which issue the lower worlds, powers, and letters. Westcott carefully collected the all too meager theories advanced by various authorities and in 1887 published his now extremely rare volume, which contains the only detailed description of the Isaiah Tablet published in English, since Humphreys translated Montfaucon's worthless description in 1721. After explaining his reticence to reveal that which Levy evidently felt was better left concealed, Westcott sums up his interpretation of the tablet as follows. The diagram of Levy, by which he explains the mystery of the tablet, shows the upper region divided into the 4 seasons of the year, each with 3 signs of the zodiac, and he has added the 4-lettered sacred name, the Tetragrammaton, assigning Yod to Aquarius, that is Canopus, He to Taurus, that is Apis, Vau to Leo, that is Mamphta, and He final to Typhon. Note the cherubic parallel, man, bull, lion, and eagle. The 4th form is found either as scorpion or eagle depending upon the occult good or evil intention. In the demotic zodiac, the snake replaces the scorpion. The lower region he ascribes to the 12 simple Hebrew letters, associating them with the 4 quarters of the horizon. Compare the Sefer Yetzirah. The central region he ascribes to the solar powers and the planetary. In the middle we see above the sun, marked Ops, and below it is a Solomon's seal, above a cross, a double triangle, hexapla, 1 light and 1 dark triangle superposed, the whole forming a sort of complex symbol of Venus. To the Ibomorphos, he gives the 3 dark planets, Venus, Mercury, and Mars, placed around a dark triangle erect, denoting fire. To the Nephtheian triad, he gives 3 light planets, Saturn, Luna, and Jupiter, around a light inverted triangle, which denotes water. There is a necessary connection between water, female power, passive principle, Binah, and Sephirotic mother and bride. See the Kabbalah by Mathers. Note, the ancient signs for the planets were all composed of a cross, solar disk, and crescent. Venus is a cross below a sun disk, Mercury a disk with a crescent above and cross below. Saturn is a cross whose lowest point touches the apex of the crescent. Jupiter is a crescent whose lowest point touches the left-hand end of a cross. All these are deep mysteries. Note that Levy in his original plate transposed Serapis and Hecate, but not the Apis Noir and Apis Blanc, perhaps because of the head of Bes being associated by him with Hecate. Note that having referred the 12 simple letters to the lower, the 7 doubles must correspond to the central region of the planets, and then the great triad, AMS, the mother letters representing air, water, and fire, remain to be pictured. Around S, the central Iynx, or Yod, by the Ophinian triad, the 2 serpents and the Leonine Sphinx. Levy's word, ops, in the center in the Latin ops, terra, genius of the earth, and the Greek ops, Rhea, or Kubel, Sibyl, often draws a goddess seated in a chariot drawn by lions. She is crowned with turrets and holds a key. See the Isaiah tablet. Westcott's key to the Bembeen table. From Westcott's The Isaiah tablet. Zoroaster declared that the number 3 shines throughout the world. This is revealed in the Bembeen table by a series of triads representing the creative impulses. Of the Isaiah table, Alexander Lenoir writes, "The Isaiah table, as a work of art, is not of great interest. It is but a composition, rather cold and insignificant, whose figures, summarily sketched and methodically placed near each other, give but little impression of life. But if, on the contrary, after examining it, we understand the purpose of the author, we become soon convinced that the Isaiah table is an image of the heavenly sphere, divided into small parts to be used very like for general teaching. According to that idea, we can conclude that the Isaiah table was originally the introduction to a collection, followed by the mysteries of Isis. It was engraved on copper in order to be used in the ceremonial of initiation. See New Essay on the Isaiah Table. The essay published in French by Alexandre Lenoir in 1809, while curious and original, contains little real information on the tablet, which the author seeks to prove was an Egyptian calendar or astrological chart. As both Montfaucon and Lenoir, in fact all writers on the subject since 1651, either have based their work upon that of Kircher or have been influenced considerably by him, a careful translation has been made of the latter's original article, 80 pages of 17th century Latin. The double-page plate at the beginning of this chapter is a faithful reproduction made by Kircher from the engraving in the Museum of Hieroglyphics. The small letters and numbers used to designate the figures were added by him to clarify his commentary and will be used for the same purpose in this work. Like nearly all religious and philosophical antiquities, the Bembeen table of Isis has been the subject of much controversy. In a footnote, A. E. Waite, unable to differentiate between the true and the purported nature of the origin of the tablet, echoes the sentiments of J. G. Wilkinson, another eminent exotericus. The original table is exceedingly late and is roughly termed a forgery. On the other hand, Edward Winckelmann, a man of profound learning, defends the genuineness and antiquity of the tablet. A sincere consideration of the Mensa Isaica discloses one fact of paramount importance, that although whoever fashioned the table was not necessarily an Egyptian, he was an initiate of the highest order, conversant with the most arcane tenets of Hermetic esotericism. Symbolism of the Bembeen table. The following necessarily brief elucidation of the Bembeen table is based upon a digest of the writings of Kircher supplemented by other information gleaned by the present author from the mystical writings of the Chaldeans, Hebrews, Egyptians, and Greeks. The temples of the Egyptians were so designed that the arrangement of chambers, decorations, and utensils was all of symbolic significance, as shown by the hieroglyphics that covered them. Beside the altar, which usually was in the center of each room, was the cistern of Nile water, which flowed in and out through unseen pipes. Here also were images of the gods in concatenated series, accompanied by magical inscriptions. In these temples, by use of symbols and hieroglyphics, neophytes were instructed in the secrets of the sacerdotal caste. The tablet of Isis was originally a table or altar, and its emblems were part of the mysteries explained by priests. Tables were dedicated to the various gods and goddesses. In this case, Isis was so honored. The substances from which the tables were made differed according to the relative dignities of the deities. The tables consecrated to Jupiter and Apollo were of gold. Those to Diana, Venus, and Juno were of silver. Those to the other superior gods, of marble. Those to the lesser divinities, of wood. Tables were also made of metals corresponding to the planets governed by the various celestials. As food for the body is spread on a banquet table, so on these sacred altars were spread the symbols which, when understood, feed the invisible nature of man. In his introduction to the table, Kircher summarizes its symbolism thus: "It teaches, in the first place, the whole constitution of the threefold world, archetypal, intellectual, and sensible. The supreme divinity is shown moving from the center to the circumference of a universe made up of both sensible and inanimate things, all of which are animated and agitated by the one supreme power which they call the Father Mind, and represented by a threefold symbol. Here also are shown three triads from the Supreme One, each manifesting one attribute of the first Trimurti. These triads are called the foundation, or the base of all things. In the table is also set forth the arrangement and distribution of those divine creatures that aid the Father Mind in the control of the universe. Here, in the upper panel, are to be seen the governors of the worlds, each with its fiery, ethereal, and material insignia. Here also, in the lower panel, are the Fathers of Fountains, whose duty it is to care for and preserve the principles of all things and sustain the inviolable laws of nature. Here are the gods of the spheres, and also those who wander from place to place, laboring with all substances and forms, zonia and azonia, grouped together as figures of both sexes, with their faces turned to their superior deity. The Mensa Isaica, which is divided horizontally into 3 chambers or panels, may represent the ground plan of the chambers in which the Isaic mysteries were given. The center panel is divided into 7 parts or lesser rooms, and the lower has 2 gates, 1 at each end. The entire table contains 45 figures of the first importance and a number of lesser symbols. The 45 main figures are grouped into 15 triads, of which 4 are in the upper panel, 7 in the central, and 4 in the lower. According to both Kircher and Levy, the triads are divided in the following manner. Of these 15 triads, Kircher writes, the figures differ from each other in 8 highly important aspects, such as according to form, position, gesture, act, raiment, headdress, staff, and lastly, according to the hieroglyphics placed around them, whether these be flowers, shrubs, small letters, or animals. These 8 symbolic methods of portraying the secret powers of the figures are subtle reminders of the 8 spiritual senses of cognition, by means of which the real self in man may be comprehended. To express this spiritual truth, the Buddhists use the wheel with 8 spokes and raise their consciousness by means of the Noble Eightfold Path. The ornamented border enclosing the 3 main panels of the table contains many symbols consisting of birds, animals, reptiles, human beings, and composite forms. According to one reading of the table, this border represents the 4 elements. The creatures are elemental beings. According to another interpretation, the border represents the archetypal spheres, and in its frieze of composite figures are the patterns of those forms which, in various combinations, will subsequently manifest themselves in the material world. The 4 flowers at the corners of the table are those which, because their blossoms always face the sun and follow its course across the sky, are sacred emblems of that finer part of man's nature, which delights in facing its Creator. According to the secret doctrine of the Chaldeans, the universe is divided into 4 states of being, planes or spheres: archetypal, intellectual, sidereal, and elemental. Each of these reveals the others, the superior controlling the inferior, and the inferior receiving influence from the superior. The archetypal plane was considered synonymous with the intellect of the triune divinity. Within this divine, incorporeal, and eternal sphere are included all the lower manifestations of life, all that is, has been, or ever shall be. Within the cosmic intellect, all things spiritual or material exist as archetypes, or divine thought forms, which is shown in the table by a chain of secret similes. In the middle region of the table appears the all-form containing personified spiritual essence, the source and substance of all things. From this proceed the lower worlds as 9 emanations in groups of 3, the Ophionic, Ibimorphous, and Nephtian triads. Consider in this connection the analogy of the Kabbalistic Sephiroth, or the 9 spheres issuing from Kether, the crown, the 12 governors of the universe, the Mendician, Ammonian, Momphthean, and Omphthean triads, vehicles for the distribution of the creative influences, and shown in the upper region of the table, are directed in their activities by the divine mind patterns existing in the archetypal sphere. The archetypes are abstract patterns formulated in the divine mind, and by them all the inferior activities are controlled. In the lower region of the table are the father fountains, the Horaean, Pendokean, Thostic, and Aleuristic triads, keepers of the great gates of the universe. These distribute to the lower worlds the influences descending from the governors shown above. In the theology of the Egyptians, goodness takes precedence, and all things partake of its nature to a higher or lower degree. Goodness is sought by all. It is the prime cause of causes. Goodness is self-diffused, and hence exists in all things, for nothing can produce that which it does not have in itself. The table demonstrates that all is in God, and God is in all, that all is in all, and each is in each. In the intellectual world are invisible spiritual counterparts of the creatures which inhabit the elemental world. Therefore the lowest exhibits the highest, the corporeal declares the intellectual, and the invisible, made manifest by its works. For this reason, the Egyptians made images of substances existing in the inferior sensible world to serve as visible exemplars of superior and invisible powers. To the corruptible images, they assign the virtues of the incorruptible divinities, thus demonstrating arcanely that this world is but the shadow of God, the outward picture of paradise within. All that is in the invisible archetypal spheres is revealed in the sensible corporeal world by the light of nature. The archetypal and creative mind, first through its paternal foundation and afterwards through secondary gods called intelligences, poured out the whole infinity of its powers by continuous exchange from highest to lowest. In their phallic symbolism, the Egyptians used the sperm to represent the spiritual spheres, because each contains all that comes forth from it. The Chaldeans and Egyptians also held that everything which is a result dwells in the cause of itself, and turns to that cause as the lotus to the sun. Accordingly, the supreme intellect, through its paternal foundation, first created light, the angelic world. Out of that light were then created the invisible hierarchies of beings, which some call the stars, and out of the stars the 4 elements and the sensible world were formed. Thus all are in all, after their respective kinds. All visible bodies or elements are in the invisible stars or spiritual elements, and the stars are likewise in those bodies. The stars are in the angels, and the angels in the stars. The angels are in God, and God is in all. Therefore all are divinely in the divine, angelically in the angels, and corporeally in the corporeal world, and vice versa. Just as the seed is the tree folded up, so the world is God unfolded. Proclus says, every property of divinity permeates all creation and gives itself to all inferior creatures. One of the manifestations of the Supreme Mind is the power of reproduction according to species which it confers upon, every creature of which it is the divine part. Thus, souls, heavens, elements, animals, planets, and stones generate themselves each according to its pattern, but all are dependent upon the one fertilizing principle existing in the Supreme Mind. The fecundative power, though of itself a unit, manifests differently through the various substances, for in the mineral it contributes to material existence, in the plant it manifests as vitality, and in the animal as sensibility. It imparts motion to the heavenly bodies, thought to the souls of men, intellectuality to the angels, and superessentiality to God. Thus it is seen that all forms are of one substance and all life of one force. and these are coexistent in the nature of the Supreme One. This doctrine was first expounded by Plato. His disciple, Aristotle, set it forth in these words: "We say that this sensible world is an image of another. Therefore, since this world is vivid or alive, how much more, then, that other must live? Yonder, therefore, above the stellar virtues, stand other heavens to be attained, like the heavens of this world. Beyond them, because they are of a higher kind, brighter and vaster, nor are they distant from each other like this one, for they are incorporeal. Yonder, too, exists an earth, not of inanimate matter, but vivid with animal life and all natural terrestrial phenomena like this one, but of other kinds and perfections. There are plants, also, and gardens, and flowing water. There are aquatic animals, but of nobler species. Yonder is air and life appropriate to it, all immortal. And although the life there is analogous to ours, yet it is nobler, seeing that it is intellectual, perpetual, and unalterable. For if anyone should object and ask, how in the world above do the plants, etc., above mentioned, find footing, we should answer that they do not have objective existence, for they were produced by the primal author in an absolute condition and without exteriorization. They are therefore in the same case as intellect and soul. They suffer no defect such as waste and corruption, since the beings yonder are full of energy, strength, and joy, as living in a life sublime, and being the issue of one fount and of one quality, compounded of all like sweet savors, delicate perfumes, harmonious color and sound, and other perfections. Nor do they move violently about, nor intermix nor corrupt each other, but each perfectly preserves its own essential character, and they are simple and do not multiply as corporeal beings do. In the midst of the table is a great covered throne with a seated female figure representing Isis, but here called the Pantomorphic Eunuchs. G.R.S. Mead defines the eunuchs as a transmitting intelligence. Others have declared it to be a symbol of universal being. Over the head of the goddess, the throne is surmounted by a triple crown, and beneath her feet is the house of material substance. The threefold crown is here symbolic of the triune divinity, called by the Egyptians the Supreme Mind, and described in the Sefer HaZohar as being hidden and unrevealed. According to the Hebrew system of Kabbalism, the tree of the Sephiroth was divided into two parts, the upper invisible and the lower visible. The upper consisted of 3 parts and the lower of 7. The 3 uncognizable Sephiroth were called Kether, the crown, Chokhmah, wisdom, and Binah, understanding. These are too abstract to permit of comprehension, whereas the lower 7 spheres that came forth from them were within the grasp of human consciousness. The central panel contains 7 triads of figures. These represent the lower Sephiroth, all emanating from the concealed threefold crown over the throne. Kircher writes, "The throne denotes the diffusion of the triform Supreme Mind along the universal paths of the 3 worlds. Out of these 3 intangible spheres emerges the sensible universe, which Plutarch calls the House of Horns, and the Egyptians, the Great Gate of the Gods. The top of the throne is in the midst of diffused serpent-shaped flames, indicating that the Supreme Mind is filled with light and life, eternal and incorruptible, removed from all material contact. How the Supreme Mind communicated his fire to all creatures is clearly set forth in the symbolism of the table. The divine fire is communicated to lower spheres through the universal power of nature, personified by the world virgin, Isis, here denominated the eunuchs, or the polymorphous all-containing universal idea. The world idea is here used in its Platonic sense. Plato believed that there are eternal forms of all possible things which exist without matter, and to these eternal and immaterial forms he gave the name of ideas. In the Platonic sense, ideas were the patterns according to which the deity fashioned the phenomenal or archetypal world. Sir W. Hamilton. Kircher describes the 21 figures in the central panel thus: 7 principal triads corresponding to 7 superior worlds are shown in the central section of the table. They all originate from the fiery, invisible archetype, the triple crown of the throne. The first, the Ophionic or Onyx triad, VSW, corresponds to the vital and fiery world and is the first intellectual world, called by the ancients the Etherium. Zoroaster says of it, "Oh, what rigorous rulers this world has." The second, or Ibimorphous triad, OQR, corresponds to the second intellectual or ethereal world and is concerned with the principle of humidity. The third, or Nephtheian triad, XYZ, corresponds to the third intellectual and ethereal world and is concerned with fecundity. These are the three triads of the ethereal worlds, which correspond to the Father Foundation. Then follow the four triads of the sensible or material worlds, of which the first two correspond to the sidereal worlds, namely Osiris and Isis, sun and moon, indicated by two bulls. They are followed by two triads, the Hecatine and the Serapeian, corresponding to the sublunary and subterranean worlds. These complete the 7 worlds of primary genii ruling the natural universe. Psellus quotes Zoroaster. The Egyptians and the Chaldeans taught that there were 7 corporeal worlds, i.e., worlds ruled by the intellectual powers. The first is of pure fire, the second, third, and fourth, ethereal, the fifth, sixth, and seventh, material, the seventh being the one called terrestrial and hater of light, and is located under the moon, comprising within itself the matter called fundus, or foundation. These 7, plus the one invisible crown, constitute the 8 worlds. Plato writes that it is needful for the philosopher to know these 7 circles beneath the first one are arranged according to the Egyptians. The first triad of fire denotes life, the second, water, over which rule the ibimorphous divinities, and the third, air, ruled by Nephthah. From the fire the heavens were created, from the water the earth, and air was the mediator between them. In the Sephirah Yetzirah, it is said that from the 3 originate the 7, i.e., the height, the depth, the east, the west, the north, and the south, and the holy temple in the center, sustaining them all. Is not the holy temple in the center the great throne of the many-formed spirit of nature, which is shown in the middle of the tablet? What are the 7 triads but the 7 powers that rule over the world? Psellus writes, the Egyptians worshipped the triad of faith, truth, and love, and the 7 fountains, the sun as ruler, the fountain of matter, then the fountain of the archangels, the fountain of the senses, of judgment, of lightning, of reflections, and of characters of unknown composition. They say that the highest material fountains are those of Apollo, Osiris, and Mercury, the fountains of the centers of the elements. Thus they understood by the sun as ruler, the solar world, by the material, archangelic, the lunar world, by the fountain of the senses, the world of Saturn, by judgment, Jupiter, by lightning, Mars, by that of the reflections, or mirrors, the world of Venus, by the fountain of characters, the world of Mercury. All these are shown by the figures in the center pane of the tablet. The upper panel contains the 12 figures of the zodiac arranged in 4 triads. The center figure in each group represents one of the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac. S is the sign of Aquarius, Z, Taurus, C, Leo, and G, Scorpio. These are called the Fathers. In the secret teachings of the Far East, these 4 figures, the man, the bull, the lion, and the eagle, are called the winged globes, or the 4 Maharajas, who stand upon the corners of creation. The 4 cardinal signs, P, Capricorn, X, Aries, B, Cancer, F, Libra, are called the powers. The 4 common signs, V, Pisces, A, Gemini, E, Virgo, H, Sagittarius, are called the minds of the 4 lords. This explains the meaning of the winged globes of Egypt, for the 4 central figures, Aquarius, Taurus, Leo, and Scorpio, called by Ezekiel the cherubim, are the globes. The cardinal and common signs on either side are the wings. Therefore, the 12 signs of the zodiac may be symbolized by 4 globes, each with 2 wings. The celestial triads are further shown by the Egyptians as a globe, the Father, from which issue a serpent, the mind, and wings, the power. These 12 forces are the fabricators of the world, and from them emanate the microcosm, or the mystery of the 12 sacred animals, representing in the universe the 12 parts of the world, and in man the 12 parts of the human body. Anatomically, the 12 figures in the upper panel may well symbolize the 12 convolutions of the brain, and the 12 figures in the lower panel the 12 zodiacal members and organs of the human body, for man is a creature formed of the 12 sacred animals, with his members and organs under the direct control of the 12 governors or powers resident in the brain. A more profound interpretation is found in the correspondences between the 12 figures in the upper panel and the 12 in the lower. This furnishes a key to one of the most arcane of ancient secrets, the relationship existing between the two great zodiacs, the fixed and the movable. The fixed zodiac is described as an immense dodecahedron, its 12 surfaces representing the outermost walls of abstract space. From each surface of this dodecahedron, a great spiritual power, radiating inward, becomes embodied as one of the hierarchies of the movable zodiac, which is a band of circumambulating so-called fixed stars. Within this movable zodiac are posited the various planetary and elemental bodies. The relation of these two zodiacs to the subzodiacal spheres has a correlation in the respiratory system of the human body. The great fixed zodiac may be said to represent the atmosphere, the movable zodiac, the lungs, and the subzodiacal worlds, the body. The spiritual atmosphere containing the vivifying energies of the 12 divine powers of the great fixed zodiac is inhaled by the cosmic lungs, the movable zodiac, and distributed by them through the constitution of the 12 holy animals, which are the parts and members of the material universe. The functional cycle is completed when the poisonous effluvia of the lower worlds collected by the movable zodiac are exhaled into the fixed zodiac, there to be purified by passing through the divine natures of its 12 eternal hierarchies. The table as a whole is susceptible of many interpretations. If the border of the table with its hieroglyphic figures be accepted as the spiritual source, then the throne in the center represents the physical body within which human nature is enthroned. From this point of view, the entire table becomes emblematic of the auric bodies of man, with the border as the outer extremity or shell of the auric egg. If the throne be accepted as the symbol of the spiritual sphere, the border typifies the elements, and the various panels surrounding the central one become emblematic of the worlds or planes emanating from the one divine source. If the table be considered from a purely physical basis, the throne becomes symbolic of the generative system, and the table reveals the secret processes of embryology as applied to the formation of the material worlds. If a purely physiological and anatomical interpretation be desired, the central throne becomes the heart, the ibimorphous triad, the mind, the Nephtheian triad, the generative system, and the surrounding hieroglyphics, the various parts and members of the human body. From the evolutionary viewpoint, the central gate becomes the point of both entrance and exit. Here also is set forth the process of initiation, in which the candidate, after passing successfully through the various ordeals, is finally brought into the presence of his own soul, which he alone is capable of unveiling. If cosmogony be the subject of consideration, the central panel represents the spiritual worlds, the upper panel the intellectual worlds, and the lower panel the material worlds. The central panel may also symbolize the 9 invisible worlds and the creature marked T, the physical nature, the footstool of Isis, the spirit of universal life. Considered in the light of alchemy, the central panel contains the metals and the borders of the alchemical processes. The figure seated on the throne is the universal Mercury, the stone of the wise. The flaming canopy of the throne above is the divine sulfur, and the cube of earth beneath is the elemental salt. The 3 triads, or the paternal foundation, in the central panel represent the silent watchers, the 3 invisible parts of the nature of man. The 2 panels on either side are the quaternary lower nature of man. In the central panel are 21 figures. This number is sacred to the sun, which consists of 3 great powers, each with 7 attributes, and by Kabbalistic reduction 21 becomes 3, or the great triad. It will yet be proved that the table of Isis is directly connected with Egyptian Gnosticism, for in a Gnostic papyrus preserved in the Bodleian Library, there is a direct reference to the 12 fathers or paternities, beneath whom are 12 fountains. See Egyptian Magic by SSDD. That the lower panel represents the underworld is further emphasized by the two gates, the Great Gate of the East and the Great Gate of the West, for in the Chaldean theology, the sun rises and sets through the gates in the underworld, where it wanders during the hours of darkness. As Plato was for 13 years, under the instruction of the Magi Parthenius, Ochoaps, Secnophus, and Etamin of Sebennythus, his philosophy consequently is permeated with the Chaldean and Egyptian system of triads. The Bembine table is a diagrammatic exposition of the so-called Platonic philosophy, for in its design is epitomized the entire theory of mystic cosmogony and generation. The most valuable guide to the interpretation of this table is the Commentaries of Proclus on the Theology of Plato. The Chaldean oracles of Zoroaster also contains many allusions to the theogonic principles which are demonstrated by the table. The Theogony of Hesiod contains the most complete account of the Greek cosmogony myth. Orphic cosmogony has left its impress upon the various forms of philosophy and religion, Greek, Egyptian, and Syrian, which it contacted. Chief of the Orphic symbols was the mundane egg, from which Phanes sprang into light. Thomas Taylor considers the Orphic egg to be synonymous with the mixture from bound and infinity mentioned by Plato in the Philebus. The egg is furthermore the third intelligible triad and the proper symbol of the Demiurgus, whose auric body is the egg of the inferior universe. Eusebius, on the authority of Porphyry, declared that the Egyptians acknowledged one intellectual author or creator of the world under the name of Kneph, and that they worshipped him in a statue of human form and dark blue complexion, holding in his hand a girdle and a scepter, wearing on his head a royal plume, and thrusting forth an egg out of his mouth. See an analysis of the Egyptian mythology. While the Bembine table is rectangular-shaped, it signifies philosophically the Orphic egg of the universe with its contents. In the esoteric doctrines, the supreme individual achievement is the breaking of the Orphic egg, which is equivalent to the return of the spirit to the nirvana, the absolute condition of the Oriental mystics. The New Pantheon by Samuel Boyce contains 3 plates showing various sections of the Bembine table. The author, however, makes no important contribution to the knowledge of the subject. In the mythology and fables of the ancients explained from history, the Abbé Bagnière devotes a chapter to a consideration of the Mensa Isaica. After reviewing the conclusions of Montfaucon, Kircher, and Pignorius, he adds, "I am of the opinion that it was a votive table, which some prince or private person had consecrated to Isis as an acknowledgment for some benefit which he believed she had conferred upon him." Wonders of Antiquity. It was a common practice among the early Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans to seal lighted lamps in the sepulchres of their dead as offerings to the god of death. Possibly it was also believed that the deceased could use these lights in finding his way through the valley of the shadow. Later, as the custom became generally established, not only actual lamps, but miniatures of them in terracotta were buried with the dead. Some of the lamps were enclosed in circular vessels for protection, and instances have been recorded in which the original oil was found in them in a perfect state of preservation after more than 2,000 years. There is ample proof that many of these lamps were burning when the sepulchres were sealed, and it has been declared that they were still burning when the vaults were opened hundreds of years later. The possibility of preparing a fuel which would renew itself as rapidly as it was consumed has been a source of considerable controversy among medieval authors. After due consideration of the evidence at hand, it seems well within the range of possibility that the ancient priest-chemists did manufacture lamps that burned, if not indefinitely, at least for considerable periods of time. Numerous authorities have written on the subject of ever-burning lamps. W. Wynne Westcott estimates the number of writers who have given the subject consideration as more than 150, and H. P. Blavatsky as 173. While conclusions reached by different authors are at variance, A majority admit the existence of these phenomenal lamps. Only a few maintained that the lamps would burn forever, but many were willing to concede that they might remain alight for several centuries without replenishment of the fuel. Some considered these so-called perpetual lights as mere artifices of the crafty pagan priests, while a great many, admitting that the lamps actually burned, made the sweeping assertion that the devil was using this apparent miracle to ensnare the credulous and thereby lead their souls to perdition. On this subject, the learned Jesuit Athanasius Kircher, usually dependable, exhibits a striking inconsistency. In his Oedipus Egypticus he writes, "Not a few of these ever-burning lamps have been found to be the devices of devils, and I take it that all the lamps found in the tombs of the Gentiles dedicated to the worship of certain gods were of this kind, not because they burned, or have been reported to burn, with a perpetual flame, but because probably the devil set them there, maliciously intending thereby to obtain fresh credence for a false worship." Having admitted that dependable authorities defend the existence of the ever-burning lamps, and that even the devil lends himself to their manufacture, Kircher next declared the entire theory to be desperate and impossible, and to be classed with perpetual motion and the philosopher's stone. Having already solved the problem to his satisfaction once, Kircher solves it again, but differently, in the following words. "In Egypt, there are rich deposits of asphalt and petroleum. What did these clever fellows, the priests, do? Then but connect an oil deposit by a secret duct with one or more lamps, provided with wicks of asbestos. How could such lamps help burning perpetually? In my opinion, this is the solution of the riddle of the supernatural everlastingness of these ancient lamps." Montfaucon, in his Antiquities, agrees in the main with the later deductions of Kircher, believing the fabled perpetual lamps of the temples to be cunning mechanical contrivances. He further adds that the belief that lamps burned indefinitely in tombs was the result of the noteworthy fact that in some cases fumes resembling smoke poured forth from the entrances of newly opened vaults. Parties going in later and discovering lamps scattered about the floor assumed that they were the sources of the fumes. There are several interesting stories concerning the discoveries of ever-burning lamps in various parts of the world. In a tomb on the Appian Way, which was opened during the papacy of Paul III, was found a burning lamp which had remained alight in a hermetically sealed vault for nearly 1,600 years. According to an account written by a contemporary, a body, that of a young and beautiful girl with long golden hair, was found floating in an unknown transparent liquid, and as well preserved as though death had occurred but a few hours before. About the interior of the vault were a number of significant objects, which included several lamps, one of them a light. Those entering the sepulchre declared that the draught caused by the opening of the door blew out the light, and the lamp could not be relighted. Kircher reproduces an epitaph, Tuliole filiae miae, supposedly found in the tomb, but which Montfaucon declares never existed, the latter adding that, although conclusive evidence was not found, the body was generally believed to be that of Tuliola, the daughter of Cicero. Ever-burning lamps have been discovered in all parts of the world, not only the Mediterranean countries, but also India, Tibet, China, and South America have contributed records of lights which burned continuously without fuel. The examples which follow were selected at random from the imposing list of perpetual lamps found in different ages. Plutarch wrote of a lamp that burned over the door of a temple to Jupiter Ammon. The priest declared that it had remained alight for centuries without fuel. St. Augustine described a perpetual lamp guarded in a temple in Egypt, sacred to Venus, which neither wind nor water could extinguish. He believed it to be the work of the devil. An ever-burning lamp was found at Edessa, or Antioch, during the reign of Emperor Justinian. It was in a niche over the city gate, elaborately enclosed to protect it from the elements. The date upon it proved that the lamp had been burning for more than 500 years. It was destroyed by soldiers. During the early Middle Ages, a lamp was found in England which had burned since the 3rd century after Christ. The monument containing it was believed to be the tomb of the father of Constantine the Great. The lantern of Pallas was discovered near Rome in AD 1401. It was found in the sepulchre of Pallas, son of Evander, immortalized by Virgil in his Aeneid. The lamp was placed at the head of the body and had burned with a steady glow for more than 2,000 years. In A.D. 1550, on the island of Nessus, in the Bay of Naples, a magnificent marble vault was opened in which was found a lamp still alight, which had been placed there before the beginning of the Christian era. Pausanias described a beautiful golden lamp in the temple of Minerva, which burned steadily for a year without refueling or having the wick trimmed. The ceremony of filling the lamp took place annually, and time was measured by the ceremony. According to the Fama Fraternitatis, the crypt of Christian Rosenkreutz, when opened 120 years after his death, was found to be brilliantly illuminated by a perpetual lamp suspended from the ceiling. Numa Pompilius, king of Rome and magician of considerable power, caused a perpetual light to burn in the dome of a temple he had created in honor of an elemental being. In England, a curious tomb was found containing an automaton which moved when certain stones in the floor of the vault were stepped upon by an intruder. At that time, the Rosicrucian controversy was at its height, so it was decided that the tomb was that of a Rosicrucian initiate. A countryman, discovering the tomb and entering, found the interior brilliantly lighted by a lamp hanging from the ceiling. As he walked, his weight depressed some of the floor stones. At once a seated figure in heavy armor began to move. Mechanically, it rose to its feet and struck the lamp with an iron baton, completely destroying it, and thus effectually preventing the discovery of the secret substance which maintained the flame. How long the lamp had burned is unknown, but certainly it had been for a considerable number of years. It is related that among the tombs near Memphis and in the Brahmin temples of India, lights have been found in sealed chambers and vessels, but sudden exposure to the air has extinguished them and caused their fuel to evaporate. It is now believed that the wicks of these perpetual lamps were made of braided or woven asbestos, called by the alchemists salamander's wool, and that the fuel was one of the products of alchemical research. Kircher attempted to extract oil from asbestos, being convinced that, as the substance itself was indestructible by fire, and oil extracted from it would supply the lamp with a fuel likewise indestructible. After spending 2 years in fruitless experimental work, he concluded that the task was impossible of accomplishment. Several formulae for the making of the fuel for the lamps have been preserved. In Isis Unveiled, H.P. Blavatsky reprints 2 of these formulae from early authors, Trittenheim and Bartholomew Korndorff. One will suffice to give a general understanding of the process. Sulfur alum, sublime them into flowers, of which add of crystalline Venetian borax, powdered. Upon these effuse high rectified spirit of wine, and digest it. Then abstract it and pour on fresh. Repeat this so often till the sulfur melts like wax without any smoke. Upon a hot plate of brass, this is for the pabulum, but the wick is to be prepared after this manner. Gather the threads of thrums of the lapis asbestos to the thickness of your middle and the length of your little finger. Then put them into a Venetian glass, and covering them over with the aforesaid depurated sulfur or aliment, set the glass in sand for the space of 24 hours, so hot that the sulfur may bubble all the while. The wick, being thus besmeared and anointed, is to be put into a glass like a scallop shell, in such a manner that some part of it may lie above the mass of prepared sulfur. Then, setting this glass upon hot sand, you must melt the sulfur, so that it may lay hold of the wick, and, when it is lighted, it will burn with a perpetual flame, and you may set this lamp in any place where you please. The Greek Oracles. The worship of Apollo included the establishment and maintenance of places of prophecy, by means of which the gods could communicate with mankind and reveal futurity to such as deserved the boon. The early history of Greece abounds with accounts of talking trees, rivers, statues, and caves in which nymphs, dryads, or daemons had taken up their abodes, and from which they delivered oracles. While Christian authors have tried to prove that oracular revelations were delivered by the devil for the purpose of misleading humanity, they have not dared to attack the theory of oracles, because of the repeated reference to it in their own sacred writings. If the onyx stones on the shoulders of Israel's high priest made known by their flashings the will of Jehovah, then a black dove, temporarily endowed with the faculty of speech, could indeed pronounce oracles in the temple of Jupiter Ammon. If the witch of Endor could invoke the shade of Samuel, who in turn gave prophecies to Saul, could not a priestess of Apollo call up the specter of her liege to foretell the destiny of Greece? The most famous oracles of antiquity were those of Delphi, Dodona, Trophonius, and Latona, of which the talking oak trees of Dodona were the oldest. Though it is impossible to trace back to the genesis of the theory of oracular prophecy, it is known that many of the caves and fissures set aside by the Greeks as oracles were sacred long before the rise of Greek culture. The oracle of Apollo at Delphi remains one of the unsolved mysteries of the ancients. Alexander Wilder derives the name Delphi from Delphos, the womb. This name was chosen by the Greeks because of the shape of the cavern and the vent leading into the depths of the earth. The original name of the oracle was Pytho, so called because its chambers had been the abode of the great serpent Python, a fearsome creature that had crept out of the slime left by the receding flood that had destroyed all human beings except Deucalion and Pyrrha. Apollo, climbing the side of Mount Parnassus, slew the serpent after a prolonged combat and threw the body down the fissure of the oracle. From that time the sun god, surnamed the Pythian Apollo, gave oracles from the vent. With Dionysus he shared the honor of being the patron god of Delphi. Base of a Delphian tripod, from Montfaucon's Antiquities. The windings of these serpents formed the base, and the 3 heads sustained the 3 feet of the tripod. It is impossible to secure satisfactory information concerning the shape and size of the celebrated Delphian tripod. Theories concerning it are based, in most part, upon small ornamental tripods discovered in various temples. The Delphian tripod restored, from Beaumont's Gleanings of Antiquities. According to Beaumont, the above is the most authentic form of the Delphian tripod extant, but as the tripod must have changed considerably during the life of the oracle, hasty conclusions are unwise. In his description of the tripod, Beaumont divides it into 4 parts. 1. A frame with 3. 2. A reverberating basin or bowl set in the frame. 3. A flat plate or table upon which the Pythia sat. And 4. A cone-shaped cover over the table, which completely concealed the priestess, and from beneath which her voice sounded forth in weird and hollow tones. Attempts have been made to relate the Delphian tripod with the Jewish Ark of the Covenant. The frame of 3 legs was likened to the Ark of the Covenant, the flat plate or table to the mercy seat, and the cone-shaped covering to the tent of the tabernacle itself. This entire conception differs widely from that popularly accepted, but discloses a valuable analogy between Jewish and Greek symbolism. After being vanquished by Apollo, the spirit of Python remained at Delphi as the representative of his conqueror, and it was with the aid of his effluvium that the priestess was able to become en rapport with the god. The fumes rising from the fissure of the oracle were supposed to come from the decaying body of Python. The name Pythoness, or Pythia, given to the female hierophant of the oracle, means literally one who has been thrown into a religious frenzy by inhaling fumes rising from decomposing matter. It is of further interest to note that the Greeks believed the oracle of Delphi to be the umbilicus of the earth, thus proving that they considered the planet an immense human being. The connection between the principle of oracular revelation and the occult significance of the navel is an important secret belonging to the ancient mysteries. The Pythian Apollo, from Historia Diorum Fadidicorum. Apollo, the twin brother of Diana, was the son of Jupiter and Latona. Apollo was fully adult at the time of his birth. He was considered to be the first physician and the inventor of music and song. The Greeks also acclaimed him to be the father of the bow and arrow. The famous temple of Apollo at Delphi was rebuilt 5 times. The first temple was formed only of laurel branches. The second was somewhat similar. The third was brass, and the 4th and 5th were probably of marble, of considerable size and great beauty. No other oracle in Greece equaled in magnificence that of Delphi in the zenith of its power. Writers declared that it contained many statues of solid gold and silver, marvelous ornaments, and implements of the most valuable materials and beautiful workmanship, donated by princes and kings who came from all parts of the civilized world to consult the spirit of Apollo dwelling in this sanctuary. The oracle, however, is much older than the foregoing account indicates. A story of this kind was probably invented by the priests to explain the phenomena to those inquisitive persons whom they did not consider worthy of enlightenment regarding the true esoteric nature of the oracle. Some believe that the Delphic fissure was discovered by a Hyperborean priest, but as far back as recorded history goes, the cave was sacred, and persons came from all parts of Greece and the surrounding countries to question the daemon who dwelt in its chimney-like vent. Priests and priestesses guarded it closely and served the spirit who dwelt therein, and who enlightened humanity through the gift of prophecy. The story of the original discovery of the oracle is somewhat as follows. Shepherds tending their flocks on the side of Mount Parnassus were amazed at the peculiar antics of goats that wandered close to a great chasm on its southwestern spur. The animals jumped about as though trying to dance, and emitted strange cries unlike anything before heard. At last one of the shepherds, curious to learn the cause of the phenomenon, approached the vent, from which were rising noxious fumes. Immediately he was seized with a prophetic ecstasy. He danced with wild abandon, sang, jabbered inarticulate sounds, and foretold future events. Others went close to the fissure, with the same result. The fame of the place spread, and many came to learn of the future by inhaling the mephitic fumes, which exhilarated to the verge of delirium. Some of those who came, being unable to control themselves, and having temporarily the strength of madmen, tore themselves from those seeking to restrain them, and jumping into the vent, perished. In order to prevent others from doing likewise, a wall was erected around the fissure, and a prophetess was appointed to act as mediator between the oracle and those who came to question it. According to later authorities, a tripod of gold ornamented with carvings of Apollo in the form of Python, the great serpent, was placed over the cleft, and on this was arranged a specially prepared seat, so constructed that a person would have difficulty in falling off while under the influence of the oracular fumes. Just before this time a story had been circulated that the fumes of the oracle arose from the decaying body of Python. It is possible that the oracle revealed its own origin. For many centuries during its early history, virgin maidens were consecrated to the service of the oracle. They were called the Phebades, or Pythiae, and constituted that famous order now known as the Pythian priesthood. It is probable that women were chosen to receive the oracles because their sensitive and emotional nature responded more quickly and completely to the fumes of enthusiasm. 3 days before the time set to receive the communications from Apollo, the virgin priestess began the ceremony of purification. She bathed in the Castalian well, abstained from all food, drank only from the fountain of Cassotis, which was brought into the temple through concealed pipes, and just before mounting the tripod, she chewed a few leaves of the sacred bay tree. It has been said that the water was drugged to bring on distorted visions, or the priests of Delphi were able to manufacture an exhilarating and intoxicating gas, which they conducted by subterranean ducts and released into the shaft of the oracle several feet below the surface. Neither of these theories has been proved, however, nor does either in any way explain the accuracy of the predictions. When the young prophetess had completed the process of purification, she was clothed in sanctified raiment and led to the tripod, upon which she seated herself, surrounded by the noxious vapors rising from the yawning fissure. Gradually, as she inhaled the fumes, a change came over her. It was as if a different spirit had entered her body. She struggled, tore her clothing, and uttered inarticulate cries. After a time, her struggles ceased. Upon becoming calm, a great majesty seemed to possess her, and with eyes fixed on space and body rigid, she uttered the prophetic words. The predictions were usually in the form of hexameter verse, but the words were often ambiguous and sometimes unintelligible. Every sound that she made, every motion of her body, was carefully recorded by the 5 Hosai, or holy men, who were appointed as scribes to preserve the minutest details of each divination. The Hosai were appointed for life and were chosen from the direct descendants of Deucalion. After the oracle was delivered, the Pythia began to struggle again, and the spirit released her. She was then carried or supported to a chamber of rest where she remained till the nervous ecstasy had passed away. Iamblichus, in his dissertation on the mysteries, describes how the spirit of the oracle, a fiery daemon, even Apollo himself, took control of the Pythoness and manifested through her. But the prophetess in Delphi, whether she gives oracles to mankind through an attenuated and fiery spirit bursting from the mouth of the cavern, or whether being seated in the adytum on a brazen tripod, or on a stool with 4 feet, she becomes sacred to the god. Whichsoever of these is the case, she entirely gives herself up to a divine spirit and is illuminated with a ray of divine fire. And when, indeed, fire ascending from the mouth of the cavern circularly invests her in collected abundance, she becomes filled from it with a divine splendor. But when she places herself on the seat of the god, she becomes co-adapted to his stable prophetic power, and from both of these preparatory operations she becomes wholly possessed by the god. And then, indeed, he is present with and illuminates her in a separate manner, and is different from the fire, the spirit, the proper seat, and, in short, from all the visible apparatus of the place, whether physical or sacred. Among the celebrities who visited the oracle of Delphi were the immortal Apollonius of Tyana and his disciple Damis. He made his offerings, and, after being crowned with a laurel wreath and given a branch of the same plant to carry in his hand, he passed behind the statue of Apollo which stood before the entrance to the cave, and descended into the sacred place of the oracle. The priestess was also crowned with laurel, and her head bound with a band of white wool. Apollonius asked the oracle if his name would be remembered by future generations. The Pythoness answered in the affirmative, but declared that it would always be calumniated. Apollonius left the cavern in anger, but time has proved the accuracy of the prediction, for the early church fathers perpetuated the name of Apollonius as the Antichrist. For details of the story, see History de la Magi. The messages given by the virgin prophetess were turned over to the philosophers of the oracle, whose duty it was to interpret and apply them. The communications were then delivered to the poets, who immediately translated them into odes and lyrics, setting forth in exquisite form the statements supposedly made by Apollo and making them available for the populace. Serpents were much in evidence at the oracle of Delphi. The base of the tripod upon which the Pythia sat was formed of the twisted bodies of 3 gigantic snakes. According to some authorities, one of the processes used to produce the prophetic ecstasy was to force the young priestess to gaze into the eyes of a serpent. Fascinated and hypnotized, she then spoke with the voice of God. Although the early Pythian priestesses were always maidens, some still in their teens, a law was later enacted that only women past 50 years of age should be the mouthpiece of the oracle. These older women dressed as young girls and went through the same ceremonial as the first Pythiae. The change was probably the indirect result of a series of assaults made upon the persons of the priestesses by the profane. During the early history of the Delphian oracle, the god spoke only at each 7th birthday of Apollo. As time went on, however, the demand became so great that the Pythia was forced to seat herself upon the tripod every month. The times selected for the consultation and the questions to be asked were determined by lot or by vote of the inhabitants of Delphi. It is generally admitted that the effect of the Delphian oracle upon Greek culture was profoundly constructive. James Gardner sums up its influence in the following words. Its responses revealed many a tyrant and foretold his fate. Through its means, many an unhappy being was saved from destruction, and many a perplexed mortal guided in the right way. It encouraged useful institutions and promoted the progress of useful discoveries. Its moral influence was on the side of virtue, and its political influence in favor of the advancement of civil liberty. See the faiths of the world. The oracle of Dodona was presided over by Jupiter, who uttered prophecies through oak trees, birds, and vases of brass. Many writers have noted the similarities between the rituals of Dodona and those of the Druid priests of Britain and Gaul. The famous oracular dove of Dodona, alighting upon the branches of the sacred oaks, not only discoursed at length in the Greek tongue upon philosophy and religion, but also answered the queries of those who came from distant places to consult it. The talking trees stood together, forming a sacred grove. When the priest desired answers to important questions, after careful and solemn purifications they retired to the grove. They then accosted the trees, beseeching a reply from the God who dwelt therein. When they had stated their questions, the trees spoke with the voices of human beings, revealing to the priest the desired information. Some assert that there was but one tree which spoke, an oak or a beech standing in the very heart of the ancient grove. Because Jupiter was believed to inhabit this tree, he was sometimes called Phigonius, or one who lives in a beech tree. Most curious of the oracles of Dodona were the talking vases, or kettles. These were made of brass and so carefully fashioned that when struck, they gave off sound for hours. Some writers have described a row of these vases and have declared that if one of them was struck, its vibrations would be communicated to all the others, and a terrifying din ensue. Other authors describe a large single vase standing upon a pillar, near which stood another column, supporting the statue of a child holding a whip. At the end of the whip were a number of swinging cords tipped with small metal balls, and the wind, which blew incessantly through the open building, caused the balls to strike against the vase. The number and intensity of the impacts and the reverberations of the vase were all carefully noted, and the priests delivered their oracles accordingly. The Dodonian Jupiter, from Historia Deorum Fatidicorum. Jupiter was called Dodonian after the city of Dodona in Epirus. Near this city was a hill thickly covered with oak trees, which from the most ancient times had been sacred to Jupiter. The grove was further venerated because dryads, fauns, satyrs, and nymphs were believed to dwell in its depths. From the ancient oaks and beeches were hung many chains of tiny bronze bells, which tinkled day and night as the wind swayed the branches. Some assert that the celebrated talking dove of Dodona was in reality a woman, because in Thessaly both prophetesses and doves were called Pleiades. It is supposed that the first temple of Dodona was erected by Deucalion and those who survived the great flood with him. For this reason, the oracle at Dodona was considered the oldest in Greece. When the original priests of Dodona, the Seloi, mysteriously vanished, the oracle was served for many centuries by 3 priestesses who interpreted the vases and at midnight interrogated the sacred trees. The patrons of the oracles were expected to bring offerings and to make contributions. Another remarkable oracle was the cave of Trophonius, which stood upon the side of a hill with an entrance so small that it seemed impossible for a human being to enter. After the consultant had made his offering at the statue of Trophonius and had donned the sanctified garments, he climbed the hill to the cave, carrying in one hand a cake of honey. Sitting down at the edge of the opening, he lowered his feet into the cavern. Thereupon his entire body was precipitately drawn into the cave, which was described by those who had entered it as having only the dimensions of a fair-sized oven. When the oracle had completed its revelation, the consultant, usually delirious, was forcibly ejected from the cave, feet foremost. Near the cave of the oracle 2 fountains bubbled out of the earth within a few feet of each other. Those about to enter the cave drank first from these fountains, the waters of which seemed to possess peculiar occult properties. The first contained the water of forgetfulness, and all who drank thereof forgot their earthly sorrows. From the second fountain flowed the sacred water of mnemosyne, or remembrance, for it later enabled those who partook of it to recall their experiences while in the cave. Though its entrance was marked by 2 brass obelisks, the cave, surrounded by a wall of white stones and concealed in the heart of a grove of sacred trees, did not present an imposing appearance. There is no doubt that those entering it passed through strange experiences, for they were obliged to leave at the adjacent temple a complete account of what they saw and heard while in the oracle. The prophecies were given in the form of dreams and visions, and were accompanied by severe pains in the head. Some never completely recovered from the after-effects of their delirium. The confused recital of their experiences was interpreted by the priests, according to the question to be answered. While the priests probably used some unknown herb to produce the dreams or visions of the cavern, their skill in interpreting them bordered on the supernatural. Before consulting the oracle, it was necessary to offer a ram to the daemon of the cave, and the priest decided by hieromancy whether the time chosen was propitious, and the sacrifice was satisfactory. Trophonius of Libadia, from Historia Deorum Fatidicorum. Trophonius and his brother Agamedes were famous architects. While building a certain treasure vault, they contrived to leave one stone movable so that they might secretly enter and steal the valuables stored there. A trap was set by the owner, who had discovered the plot, and Agamedes was caught. To prevent discovery, Trophonius decapitated his brother and fled, hotly pursued. He hid in the grove of Libadia, where the earth opened and swallowed him up. The spirit of Trophonius thereafter delivered oracles in the grove and its caverns. The name Trophonius means to be agitated, excited, or roiled. It was declared that the terrible experiences through which consultants passed in the oracular caverns so affected them that they never smiled again. The bees which accompany the figure of Trophonius were sacred because they led the first envoys from Boeotia to the site of the oracle. The figure above is said to be a production of a statue of Trophonius, which was placed on the brow of the hill above the oracle and surrounded with sharply pointed stakes, that it could not be touched. The Seven Wonders of the World. Many of the sculptors and architects of the ancient world were initiates of the mysteries, particularly the Eleusinian rites. Since the dawn of time, the truers of stone and the hewers of wood have constituted a divinely overshadowed caste. As civilization spread slowly over the earth, cities were built and deserted, monuments were erected to heroes at present unknown. Temples were built to gods who lie broken in the dust of the nations they inspired. Research has proved not only that the builders of these cities and monuments, and the sculptors who chiseled out the inscrutable faces of the gods, were masters of their crafts, but that in the world today there are none to equal them. The profound knowledge of mathematics and astronomy embodied in ancient architecture, and then equally profound knowledge of anatomy revealed in Greek statuary, proved that the fashioners of both were masterminds, deeply cultured in the wisdom which constituted the arcana of the mysteries. Thus was established the Guild of the Builders, progenitors of modern Freemasons. When employed to build palaces, temples, or combs, or to carve statues for the wealthy, those initiated architects and artists concealed in their works the secret doctrine, so that now, long after their bones have returned to dust, the world realizes that those first artisans were indeed duly initiated and worthy to receive the wages of master masons. The seven wonders of the world, while apparently designed for diverse reasons, were really monuments erected to perpetuate the arcana of the mysteries. They were symbolic structures, placed in peculiar spots, and the real purpose of their erection can be sensed only by the initiated. Eliphas Levi has noted the marked correspondence between these seven wonders and the seven planets. The seven wonders of the world were built by widows' sons in honor of the seven planetary genii. Their secret symbolism is identical with that of the seven seals of Revelation and the seven churches of Asia. 1. The Colossus of Rhodes. A gigantic brass statue, about 109 feet in height and requiring over 12 years to build, was the work of an initiated artist, Charles of Lindus. The popular theory, accepted for several hundred years, that the figure stood with 1 foot on each side of the entrance to the harbor of Rhodes and that full-rigged ships passed between its feet, has never been substantiated. Unfortunately, the figure remained standing but 56 years, being thrown down by an earthquake in 224 BC. The shattered parts of the Colossus lay scattered about the ground for more than 900 years. When they were finally sold to a Jewish merchant, who carried the metal away on the backs of 700 camels. Some believe that the brass was converted into munitions, and others that it was made into drainage pipes. This gigantic gilded figure, with its crown of solar rays and its upraised torch, signified, occultly, the glorious Son-Man of the mysteries, the universal Savior. 2. The architect Ctesiphon, in the 5th century BC, submitted to the Ionian cities a plan for erecting a joint monument to their patron goddess Diana. The place chosen was Ephesus, a city south of Smyrna. The building was constructed of marble. The roof was supported by 127 columns, each 60 feet high and weighing over 150 tons. The temple was destroyed by black magic about 356 BC, but the world fixes the odious crime upon the tool by means of which the destruction was accomplished, a mentally deranged man named Herostratus. It was later rebuilt, but the symbolism was lost. The original temple, designed as a miniature of the universe, was dedicated to the moon, the occult symbol of generation. 3. Upon his exile from Athens, Phidias, the greatest of all Greek sculptors, went to Olympia in the province of Elis, and there designed his colossal statue of Zeus, chief of the gods of Greece. There is not even an accurate description of this masterpiece now in existence. Only a few old coins give an adequate idea of its general appearance. The body of the god was overlaid with ivory, and the robes were of beaten gold. In one hand, he is supposed to have held a globe supporting a figure of the goddess of victory, in the other a scepter surmounted by an eagle. The head of Zeus was archaic, heavily bearded, and crowned with an olive wreath. The statue was seated upon an elaborately decorated throne. As its name implies, the monument was dedicated to the spirit of the planet Jupiter, one of the 7 Logi who bow before the Lord of the Sun. 4. Eliphas Levi includes the Temple of Solomon among the 7 wonders of the world, giving it the place occupied by the Pharos, or lighthouse of Alexandria. The Pharos, named for the island upon which it stood, was designed and constructed by Sostratus of Cnidus during the reign of Ptolemy, 283 to 247 BC. It is described as being of white marble and over 600 feet high. Even in that ancient day, it cost nearly $1 million. Fires were lighted in the top of it and could be seen for miles out at sea. It was destroyed by an earthquake in the 13th century, but remains of it were visible until AD 1350. Being the tallest of all the wonders, it was naturally assigned to Saturn, the father of the gods, and the true illuminator of all humanity. 5. The mausoleum at Halicarnassus was a magnificent monument erected by Queen Artemisia in memory of her dead husband, King Mausolus, from whose name the word mausoleum is derived. The designers of the building were Satyrus and Pythis, and 4 great sculptors were employed to ornament the edifice. The building, which was 114 feet long and 92 feet wide, was divided into 5 major sections, the senses, and surmounted by a pyramid, the spiritual nature of man. The pyramid rose in 24 steps, a sacred number, and upon the apex was a statue of King Mausolus in a chariot. His figure was 9 feet 9.5 inches tall. Many attempts have been made to reconstruct the monument, which was destroyed by an earthquake, but none has been altogether successful. This monument was sacred to the planet Mars and was built by an initiate for the enlightenment of the world. 6. The Gardens of Semiramis at Babylon, more commonly known as the Hanging Gardens, stood within the palace grounds of Nebuchadnezzar, near the Euphrates River. They rose in a terrace-like pyramid, and on the top was a reservoir for the watering of the gardens. They were built about 600 BC, but the name of the landscape artist has not been preserved. They symbolized the plains of the invisible world and were consecrated to Venus as the goddess of love and beauty. 7. The Great Pyramid was supreme among the temples of the mysteries. In order to be true to its astronomical symbolism, it must have been constructed about 70,000 years ago. It was the tomb of Osiris and was believed to have been built by the gods themselves, and the architect may have been the immortal Hermes. It is the monument of Mercury, the messenger of the gods, and the universal symbol of wisdom and letters. The Life and Philosophy of Pythagoras. While Nisarchus, the father of Pythagoras, was in the city of Delphi on matters pertaining to his business as a merchant, he and his wife, Parthenis, decided to consult the oracle of Delphi as to whether the fates were favorable for their return voyage to Syria. When the Pythoness, prophetess of Apollo, seated herself on the golden tripod over the yawning vent of the oracle, she did not answer the question they had asked, but told Nisarchus that his wife was then with child and would give birth to a son who was destined to surpass all men in beauty and wisdom, and throughout the course of his life would contribute much to the benefit of mankind. Nisarchus was so deeply impressed by the prophecy that he changed his wife's name to Pythasis in honor of the Pythian priestess. When the child was born at Sidon in Phoenicia, it was, as the oracle had said, a son. Nicarchus and Pythasus named the child Pythagoras, for they believed that he had been predestined by the oracle. Many strange legends have been preserved concerning the birth of Pythagoras. Some maintained that he was no mortal man, that he was one of the gods who had taken a human body to enable him to come into the world and instruct the human race. Pythagoras was one of the many sages and saviors of antiquity for whom an immaculate conception is asserted. In his Anacalypsis, Godfrey Higgins writes, "The first striking circumstance in which the history of Pythagoras agrees with the history of Jesus is that they were natives of nearly the same country, the former being born at Sidon, the latter at Bethlehem, both in Syria. The father of Pythagoras, as well as the father of Jesus, was prophetically informed that his wife should bring forth a son, who should be a benefactor to mankind. They were both born when their mothers were from home on journeys, Joseph and his wife having gone up to Bethlehem to be taxed, and the father of Pythagoras having traveled from Samos, his residence, to Sidon, about his mercantile concerns. Pythasus, the mother of Pythagoras, had a connection with an Apolloniacal specter or ghost, the god of Apollo, or god, soul. Of course, this must have been a holy ghost, and here we have the Holy Ghost, which afterward appeared to her husband, and told him that he must have no connection with his wife during her pregnancy, a story evidently the same as that relating to Joseph and Mary. From these peculiar circumstances, Pythagoras was known by the same title as Jesus, namely, the Son of God, and was supposed by the multitude to be under the influence of divine inspiration. This most famous philosopher was born sometime between 600 and 590 BC, and the length of his life has been estimated at nearly 100 years. The teachings of Pythagoras indicate that he was thoroughly conversant with the precepts of Oriental and Occidental esotericism. He traveled among the Jews and was instructed by the rabbins concerning the secret traditions of Moses, the lawgiver of Israel. Later, the school of the Essenes was conducted chiefly for the purpose of interpreting the Pythagorean symbols. Pythagoras was initiated into the Egyptian, Babylonian, and Chaldean mysteries, although it is believed that by some he was a disciple of Zoroaster. It is doubtful whether his instructor of that name was the God-man, now revered by Parsis. While accounts of his travels differ, historians agree that he visited many countries and studied at the feet of many masters. After having acquired all which it was possible for him to learn of the Greek philosophers, and presumably become an initiate in the Eleusinian mysteries, he went to Egypt, and after many rebuffs and refusals, finally succeeded in securing initiation in the mysteries of Isis at the hands of the priests of Thebes. Then this intrepid joiner wended his way into Phoenicia and Syria, where the mysteries of Adonis were conferred upon him, and crossing to the valley of the Euphrates, he tarried long enough to become versed in the secret lore of the Chaldeans, who still dwelt in the vicinity of Babylon. Finally, he made his greatest and most historic venture through Media and Persia into Hindustan, where he remained several years as a pupil and initiate of the learned Brahmins of Elephanta and Ellora. See Ancient Freemasonry by Frank C. Higgins, 32nd degree. The same author adds that the name of Pythagoras is still preserved in the records of the Brahmins as Yavankarya, the Ionian teacher. Pythagoras was said to have been the first man to call himself a philosopher. In fact, the world is indebted to him for the word philosopher. Before that time, the wise men had called themselves sages, which was interpreted to mean those who know. Pythagoras was more modest. He coined the word philosopher, which he defined as one who is attempting to find out. After returning from his wanderings, Pythagoras established a school, or, as it had been sometimes called, a university, at Crotona, a Dorian colony in southern Italy. Upon his arrival at Crotona, he was regarded askance, but after a short time those holding important positions in the surrounding colonies sought his counsel in matters of great moment. He gathered around him a small group of sincere disciples, whom he instructed in the secret wisdom which had been revealed to him, and also in the fundamentals of occult mathematics, music, and astronomy, which he considered to be the triangular foundation of all the arts and sciences. When he was about 60 years old, Pythagoras married one of his disciples, and 7 children resulted from the union. His wife was a remarkably able woman, who not only inspired him during the years of his life, but after his assassination continued to promulgate his doctrines. As is so often the case with genius, Pythagoras, by his outspokenness, incurred both political and personal enmity. Among those who came for initiation was one who, because Pythagoras refused to admit him, determined to destroy both the man and his philosophy. By means of false propaganda, this disgruntled one turned the minds of the common people against the philosopher. Without warning, a band of murderers descended upon the little group of buildings where the great teacher and his disciples dwelt, burned the structures, and killed Pythagoras. Accounts of the philosopher's death do not agree. Some say that he was murdered with his disciples, others that, on escaping from Crotona with a small band of followers, he was trapped and burned alive by his enemies in a little house where the band had decided to rest for the night. Another account states that, finding themselves trapped in the burning structure, the disciples threw themselves into the flames, making of their own bodies a bridge over which Pythagoras escaped, only to die of a broken heart a short time afterwards, as the result of grieving over the apparent fruitlessness of his efforts to serve and illuminate mankind. Pythagoras, the first philosopher. From Historia Deorum Fatidicorum. During his youth, Pythagoras was a disciple of Pherecydes and Hermodamus, and, while in his teens, became renowned for the clarity of his philosophic concepts. In height he exceeded 6 feet. His body was as perfectly formed as that of Apollo. Pythagoras was the personification of majesty and power, and in his presence one felt humble and afraid. As he grew older, his physical power increased rather than waned, so that as he approached the century mark he was actually in the prime of life. The influence of this great soul over those about him was such that a word of praise from Pythagoras filled his disciples with ecstasy, while one committed suicide because the master became momentarily irritated over something he had done. Pythagoras was so impressed by this tragedy that he never again spoke unkindly to or about anyone. His surviving disciples attempted to perpetuate his doctrines, but they were persecuted on every hand, and very little remains today as a testimonial to the greatness of this philosopher. It is said that the disciples of Pythagoras never addressed him or referred to him by his own name, but always as the master or that man. This may have been because of the fact that the name Pythagoras was believed to consist of a certain number of specially arranged letters with great sacred significance. The Word magazine has printed an article by T.R. Prater showing that Pythagoras initiated his candidates by means of a certain formula concealed within the letters of his own name. This may explain why the word Pythagoras was so highly revered. After the death of Pythagoras, his school gradually disintegrated, but those who had benefited by its teachings revered the memory of the great philosopher, as during his life they had reverenced the man himself. As time went on, Pythagoras came to be regarded as a god rather than a man, and his scattered disciples were bound together by their common admiration for the transcendent genius of their teacher. Edward Schur, in his Pythagoras and the Delphic Mysteries, relates the following incident as illustrative of the bond of fellowship uniting the members of the Pythagorean school. One of them, who had fallen upon sickness and poverty, was kindly taken in by an innkeeper. Before dying, he traced a few mysterious signs, the pentagram, no doubt, on the door of the inn, and said to the host, "Do not be uneasy, one of my brothers will pay my debts." A year afterwards, as a stranger was passing by this inn, he saw the signs and said to the host, "I am a Pythagorean. One of my brothers died here. Tell me what I owe you on his account." Frank C. Higgins, 32nd degree, gives an excellent compendium of the Pythagorean tenets in the following outline. Pythagoras' teachings are of the most transcendental importance to Masons, inasmuch as they are the necessary fruit of his contact with the leading philosophers of the whole civilized world of his own day, and must represent that in which all were agreed, shorn of all weeds of controversy. Thus, the determined stand made by Pythagoras in defense of pure monotheism is sufficient evidence that the tradition to the effect that the unity of God was the supreme secret of all the ancient initiations is substantially correct. The philosophical school of Pythagoras was, in a measure, also a series of initiations, for he caused his pupils to pass through a series of degrees and never permitted them personal contact with himself until they had reached the higher grades. According to his biographers, his degrees were 3 in number. The first, that of mathematicus, assuring his pupils proficiency in mathematics and geometry, which was then, as it would be now if masonry were properly inculcated, the basis upon which all other knowledge was erected. Secondly, the degree of theoreticus, which dealt with superficial applications of the exact sciences, and lastly, the degree of electus, which entitled the candidate to pass forward into the light of the fullest illumination which he was capable of absorbing. The pupils of the Pythagorean school were divided into exoterici, or pupils, in the outer grades, and esoterici, after they had passed the 3rd degree of initiation and were entitled to the secret wisdom. Silence, secrecy, and unconditional obedience were cardinal principles of this great order. See Ancient Freemasonry. Pythagorean Fundamentals. The study of geometry, music, and astronomy was considered essential to a rational understanding of God, man, or nature, and no one could accompany Pythagoras as a disciple who was not thoroughly familiar with these sciences. Many came seeking admission to his school. Each applicant was tested on these 3 subjects, and if found ignorant, was summarily dismissed. Pythagoras was not an extremist. He taught moderation in all things rather than excess in anything, for he believed that an excess of virtue was in itself a vice. One of his favorite statements was, "We must avoid with our utmost endeavor and amputate with fire and sword, and by all other means, from the body, sickness, from the soul, ignorance, from the belly, luxury, from a city, sedition, from a family, discord, and from all things, excess." Pythagoras also believed that there was no crime equal to that of anarchy. All men know what they want, but few know what they need. Pythagoras warned his disciples that when they prayed, they should not pray for themselves, that when they asked things of the gods, they should not ask things for themselves, because no man knows what is good for him, and it is for this reason undesirable to ask for things which, if obtained, would only prove to be injurious. The god of Pythagoras was the monad, or the one that is everything. He described the god as the supreme mind, distributed throughout all parts of the universe, the cause of all things, the intelligence of all things, and the power within all things. He further declared the motion of God to be circular, the body of God to be composed of the substance of light, and the nature of God to be composed of the substance of earth. Pythagoras declared that the eating of meat clouded the reasoning faculties. While he did not condemn its use or totally abstain therefrom himself, he declared that judges should refrain from eating meat before a trial, in order that those who appeared before them might receive the most honest and astute decisions. When Pythagoras decided, as he often did, to retire into the temple of God for an extended period of time to meditate and pray, he took with his supply of specially prepared food and drink. The food consisted of equal parts of the seeds of poppy and sesame, the skin of the sea onion from which the juice had been thoroughly extracted, the flower of daffodil, the leaves of mallows, and a paste of barley and peas. These he compounded together with the addition of wild honey. For a beverage he took the seeds of cucumbers, dried raisins, with seeds removed, the flowers of coriander, the seeds of mallows and purslane, scraped cheese, meal, and cream, mixed together and sweetened with wild honey. Pythagoras claimed that this was the diet of Hercules while wandering in the Libyan desert, and was according to the formula given to that hero by the goddess Ceres herself. The favorite method of healing among the Pythagoreans was by the aid of poultices. These people also knew the magic properties of vast numbers of plants. Pythagoras highly esteemed the medicinal properties of the sea onion, and he is said to have written an entire volume on the subject. Such a work, however, is not known at the present time. Pythagoras discovered that music had great therapeutic power, and he prepared special harmonies for various diseases. He apparently experimented also with color, attaining considerable success. One of his unique curative processes resulted from his discovery of the healing value of certain verses from the Odyssey and the Iliad of Homer. These he caused to be read to persons suffering from certain ailments. He was opposed to surgery in all its forms and also objected to cauterizing. He would not permit the disfigurement of the human body, for such, in his estimation, was a sacrilege against the dwelling place of the gods. Pythagoras taught that friendship was the truest and nearest perfection of all relationships. He declared that in nature there was a friendship of all for all, of gods for men, of doctrines one for another, of the soul for the body, of the rational part for the irrational part, of philosophy for its theory, of men for one another, of countrymen for one another. That friendship also existed between strangers, between a man and his wife, his children, and his servants. All bonds without friendship were shackles, and there was no virtue in their maintenance. Pythagoras believed that relationships were essentially mental rather than physical, and that a stranger of sympathetic intellect was closer to him than a blood relation whose viewpoint was at variance with his own. Pythagoras defined knowledge as the fruitage of mental accumulation. He believed that it would be obtained in many ways, but principally through observation. Wisdom was the understanding of the source or cause of all things, and this could be secured only by raising the intellect to a point where it intuitively cognized the invisible, manifesting outwardly through the visible, and thus become capable of bringing itself en rapport with the spirit of things rather than with their forms. The ultimate source that wisdom could cognize was the monad, the mysterious permanent atom of the Pythagoreans. Pythagoras taught that both man and the universe were made in the image of God, that both, being made in the same image, the understanding of one predicated the knowledge of the other. He further taught that there was a constant interplay between the grand man, the universe, and man, the little universe. Pythagoras believed that all the sidereal bodies were alive, and that the forms of the planets and stars were merely bodies encasing souls, minds, and spirits, in the same manner that the visible human form is but the encasing vehicle for an invisible spiritual organism, which is, in reality, the conscious individual. Pythagoras regarded the planets as magnificent deities, worthy of the adoration and respect of man. All these deities, however, he considered subservient to the one first cause within whom they all existed temporarily, as mortality exists in the midst of immortality. The famous Pythagorean Y signified the power of choice and was used in the mysteries as emblematic of the forking of the ways. The central stem separated into two parts, one branching to the right and the other to the left. The branch to the right was called divine wisdom, and the one to the left, earthly wisdom. Youth, personified by the candidate, walking the path of life, symbolized by the central stem of the Y, reaches the point where the path divides. The neophyte must then choose whether he will take the left-hand path and, following the dictates of his lower nature, enter upon a span of folly and thoughtlessness which will inevitably result in his undoing, or whether he will take the right-hand road and through integrity, industry, and sincerity, ultimately regain union with the immortals in the superior spheres. It is probable that Pythagoras obtained his concept of the Y from the Egyptians, who included in certain of their initiatory rituals a scene in which the candidate was confronted by two female figures. One of them, veiled with the white robes of the temple, urged the neophyte to enter into the halls of learning. The other, bedecked with jewels symbolizing earthly treasures, and bearing in her hands a tray loaded with grapes, emblematic of false light, sought to lure him into the chambers of dissipation. This symbol is still preserved among the tarot cards, where it is called the forking of the ways. The forked stick has been the symbol of life among many nations, and it was placed in the desert to indicate the presence of water. Concerning the theory of transmigration as disseminated by Pythagoras, there are differences of opinion. According to one view, he taught that mortals, who during their earthly existence had by their actions become like certain animals, returned to earth again in the form of the beasts which they had grown to resemble. Thus a timid person would return in the form of a rabbit or a deer, a cruel person in the form of a wolf or other ferocious animal, and a cunning person in the guise of a fox. This concept, however, does not fit into the general Pythagorean scheme, and it is far more likely that it was given in an allegorical rather than a literal sense. It was intended to convey the idea that human beings become bestial when they allow themselves to be dominated by their own lower desires and destructive tendencies. It is probable that the term transmigration is to be understood as what is more commonly called reincarnation, a doctrine which Pythagoras must have contacted directly or indirectly in India and Egypt. The fact that Pythagoras accepted the theory of successive reappearances of the spiritual nature in human form is found in a footnote to Levy's History of Magic. He was an important champion of what used to be called the doctrine of metempsychosis, understood as the soul's transmigration into successive bodies. He himself had been Athalides, a son of Mercury; Euphorbus, son of Panthus, who perished at the hands of Menelaus in the Trojan War; Hermodamus, a prophet of Clazomene, a city of Ionia, a humble fisherman, and finally the philosopher of Samos. Pythagoras also taught that each species of creatures had what he termed a seal, given to it by God, and that the physical form of each was the impression of this seal upon the wax of physical substance. Thus each body was stamped with the dignity of its divinely given pattern. Pythagoras believed that ultimately a man would reach a state where he would cast off his gross nature and function in a body of spiritualized ether, which would be in juxtaposition to his physical form at all times, and which might be the eighth sphere, or antichthon. From this he would ascend into the realm of the immortals, where by divine birthright he belonged. Pythagoras taught that everything in nature was divisible into three parts, and that no one could become truly wise who did not view every problem as being diagrammatically triangular. He said, "Establish the triangle and the problem is 2/3 solved." Further, all things consist of three. In conformity with this viewpoint, Pythagoras divided the universe into three parts, which he called the supreme world, the superior world, and the inferior world. The highest or supreme world was a subtle interpretive spiritual essence pervading all things and therefore the true plane of the supreme deity itself. The deity being in every sense omnipresent, omniactive, omnipotent, and omniscient. Both of the lower worlds existed within the nature of this supreme sphere. The superior world was the home of the immortals. It was also the dwelling place of the archetypes, or the seals. Their natures in no manner partook of the material of earthiness, but they, casting their shadows upon the deep, the inferior world, were cognizable only through their shadows. The third, or inferior world, was the home of those creatures who partook of material substance, or were engaged in labor with or upon material substance. Hence, this sphere was the home of the mortal gods, the demiurgi, the angels who labor with men, also the daemons who partake of the nature of the earth, and finally mankind and the lower kingdoms, those temporarily of the earth but capable of rising above that sphere by reason and philosophy. The digits 1 and 2 are not considered numbers by the Pythagoreans because they typify the two supermundane spheres. The Pythagorean numbers therefore begin with 3, the triangle, and 4, the square. These added to the 1 and the 2 produce the 10, the great number of all things, the archetype of the universe. The three worlds were called receptacles. The first was the receptacle of principles, the second was the receptacle of intelligences, and the third, or lowest, was the receptacle of quantities. The symmetrical solids were regarded by Pythagoras and by the Greek thinkers after him as of the greatest importance. To be perfectly symmetrical or regular, a solid must have an equal number of faces meeting at each of its angles, and these faces must be equal regular polygons, i.e., figures whose sides and angles are all equal. Pythagoras, perhaps, may be credited with the great discovery that there are only 5 such solids. Now, the Greeks believed the world, or material universe, to be composed of 4 elements: earth, air, fire, water, and to the Greek mind the conclusion was inevitable that the shapes of the particles of the elements were those of the regular solids. Earth particles were cubical, the cube being the regular solid possessed of greatest stability. Fire particles were tetrahedral, the tetrahedron being the simplest and, hence, lightest solid. Water particles were icosahedral, for exactly the reverse reason, whilst air particles, as intermediate between the two latter, were octahedral. The dodecahedron was, to these ancient mathematicians, the most mysterious of the solids. It was by far the most difficult to construct, the accurate drawing of the regular pentagon necessitating a rather elaborate application of Pythagoras's great theorem. Hence the conclusion, as Plato put it, that this, the regular dodecahedron, the deity employed in tracing the plan of the universe. H. Stanley Redgrove, in Bygone Beliefs. The symmetrical geometric solids. To the 5 symmetrical solids of the ancients is added the sphere, 1, the most perfect of all created forms. The 5 Pythagorean solids are the tetrahedron, 2, with 4 equilateral triangles as faces, the cube, 3, with 6 squares as faces, the octahedron, 4, with 8 equilateral triangles as faces, the icosahedron, 5, with 20 equilateral triangles as faces, and the dodecahedron, 6, with 12 regular pentagons as faces. Number related to form. Pythagoras taught that the dots symbolized the power of the number 1, the line the power of the number 2, the surface the power of the number 3, and the solid the power of the number 4. Mr. Redgrove has not mentioned the 5th element of the ancient mysteries, that which would make the analogy between the symmetrical solids and the elements complete. The 5th element, or ether, was called by the Hindus akasa. It was closely correlated with the hypothetical ether of modern science, and was the interpretive substance permeating all of the other elements and acting as a common solvent and common denominator of them. The 12-faced solid also subtly referred to the 12 immortals who surfaced the universe, and also to the 12 convolutions of the human brain, the vehicles of those immortals in the nature of man. After having drunk from a certain spring one day, one of the masters of Pythagoras announced that the spirit of the water had just predicted that a great earthquake would occur the next day, a prophecy which was fulfilled. It is highly probable that Pythagoras possessed hypnotic power, not only over man, but also over animals. He caused a bird to change the course of its flight, a bear to cease its ravages upon a community, and a bull to change its diet by the exercise of mental influence. He was also gifted with second sight, being able to see things at a distance and accurately describe incidents that had not yet come to pass. While Pythagoras, in accordance with others of his day, practiced divination, possibly arithmomancy, there is no accurate information concerning the methods which he used. He is believed to have had a remarkable wheel by means of which he could predict future events, and to have learned hydromancy from the Egyptians. He believed that brass had oracular powers, because even when everything was perfectly still, there was always a rumbling sound in brass bowls. He once addressed a prayer to the spirit of a river, and out of the water arose a voice, "Pythagoras, I greet thee." It is claimed for him that he was able to cause daemons to enter into water and disturb its surface, and by means of the agitations, certain things were predicted. The symbolic aphorisms of Pythagoras. Iamblichus gathered 39 of the symbolic sayings of Pythagoras and interpreted them. These have been translated from the Greek by Thomas Taylor. Aphorismic statement was one of the favorite methods of instruction used in the Pythagorean University of Crotona. 10 of the most representative of these aphorisms are reproduced below with a brief elucidation of their concealed meanings. 1. Declining from the public ways, walk in unfrequented paths. By this it is to be understood that those who desire wisdom must seek it in solitude. 2. Govern your tongue before all other things, following the gods. This aphorism warns man that his words, instead of representing him, misrepresent him, and that when in doubt as to what he should say, he should always be silent. 3. The wind blowing, adore the sound. Pythagoras here reminds his disciples that the fiat of God is heard in the voice of the elements, and that all things in nature manifest through harmony, rhythm, order, or procedure the attributes of the deity. 4. Assist a man in raising a burden, but do not assist him in laying it down. The student is instructed to aid the diligent, but never to assist those who seek to evade their responsibilities, for it is a great sin to encourage indolence. 5. Speak not about Pythagoric concerns without light. The world is herein warned that it should not attempt to interpret the mysteries of God and the secrets of the sciences without spiritual and intellectual illumination. 6. Having departed from your house, turn not back, for the Furies will be your attendants. Pythagoras here warns his followers that any who begin the search for truth and, after having learned part of the mystery, become discouraged and attempt to return again to their former ways of vice and ignorance will suffer exceedingly, for it is better to know nothing about divinity than to learn a little and then stop without learning all. 7. Nourish a cock, but sacrifice it not, for it is sacred to the sun and moon. 2 great lessons are concealed in this aphorism. The first is a warning against the sacrifice of living things to the gods, because life is sacred and man should not destroy it even as an offering to the deity. The second warns man that the human body, here referred to as a cock, is sacred to the sun, God, and the moon, nature, and should be guarded and preserved as man's most precious medium of expression. Pythagoras also warned his disciples against suicide. 8. Receive not a swallow into your house. This warns the seeker after truth not to allow drifting thoughts to come into his mind, nor shiftless persons to enter into his life. He must ever surround himself with rationally inspired thinkers and with conscientious workers. 9. Offer not your right hand easily to anyone. This warns the disciple to keep his own counsel and not offer wisdom and knowledge, his right hand, to such as are incapable of appreciating them. The hand here represents truth, which raises those who have fallen because of ignorance. But as many of the unregenerate do not desire wisdom, they will cut off the hand that is extended in kindness to them. Time alone can effect the redemption of the ignorant masses. 10. When rising from the bedclothes, roll them together and obliterate the impression of the body. Pythagoras directed his disciples who had awakened from the sleep of ignorance into the waking state of intelligence to eliminate from their recollection all memory of their former spiritual darkness. For a wise man, in passing, leaves no form behind him which others, less intelligent, seeing, shall use as a mold for the casting of idols. The most famous of the Pythagorean fragments are the Golden Verses, ascribed to Pythagoras himself, but concerning whose authorship there is an element of doubt. The Golden Verses contain a brief summary of the entire system of philosophy, forming the basis of the educational doctrines of Crotona, or, as it is more commonly known, the Italic school. These verses open by counseling the reader to love God, venerate the great heroes, and respect the daemons and elemental inhabitants. They then urge man to think carefully and industriously concerning his daily life, and to prefer the treasures of the mind and soul to accumulations of earthly goods. The verses also promise man that if he will rise above his lower material nature and cultivate self-control, he will ultimately be acceptable in the sight of the gods, be reunited with them, and partake of their immortality. It is rather significant to note that Plato paid a great price for some of the manuscripts of Pythagoras, which had been saved from the destruction of Crotona. See Historia Diorum Fatidicorum, Geneva, 1675. Pythagorean astronomy. According to Pythagoras, the position of each body in the universe was determined by the essential dignity of that body. The popular concept of his day was that the Earth occupied the center of the solar system, that the planets, including the sun and moon, moved about the Earth, and that the Earth itself was flat and square. Contrary to this concept, and regardless of criticism, Pythagoras declared that fire was the most important of all the elements, that the center was the most important part of every body, and that, just as Vesta's fire was in the midst of every home, so in the midst of the universe was a flaming sphere of celestial radiance. This central globe he called the Tower of Jupiter, the globe of unity, the grand monad, and the altar of Vesta. As the sacred number 10 symbolized the sum of all parts and the completeness of all things, it was only natural for Pythagoras to divide the universe into 10 spheres, symbolized by 10 concentric circles. These circles began at the center with the globe of divine fire. Then came the seven planers, the Earth, and another mysterious planet called Antichthon, which was never visible. Opinions differ as to the nature of Antichthon. Clement of Alexandria believed that it represented the mass of the heavens. Others held the opinion that it was the moon. More probably, it was the mysterious eighth sphere of the ancients, the dark planet which moved in the same orbit as the Earth, but which was always concealed from the Earth by the body of the sun, being in exact opposition to the Earth at all times. Is this the mysterious Lilith, concerning which astrologers have speculated so long? Isaac Meyer has stated, "The Pythagoreans held that each star was a world having its own atmosphere, with an immense extent surrounding it of ether." See the Kabbalah. The disciples of Pythagoras also highly revered the planet Venus, because it was the only planet bright enough to cast a shadow. As the morning star, Venus is visible before sunrise. As the evening star, it shines forth immediately after sunset. Because of these qualities, a number of names have been given to it by the ancients. Being visible in the sky at sunset, it was called Vesper, and as it arose before the sun, it was called the false light, the star of the morning, or Lucifer, which means the light-bearer. Because of this relation to the sun, the planet was also referred to as Venus, Astarte, Aphrodite, Isis, and the mother of the gods. It is possible that, at some seasons of the year in certain latitudes, the fact that Venus was a crescent could be detected without the aid of a telescope. This would account for the crescent which is often seen in connection with the goddesses of antiquity, the stories of which do not agree with the phases of the moon. The accurate knowledge which Pythagoras possessed concerning astronomy he undoubtedly secured in the Egyptian temples, for their priests understood the true relationship of the heavenly bodies many thousands of years before that knowledge was revealed to the uninitiated world. The fact that the knowledge he acquired in the temples enabled him to make assertions requiring 2,000 years to check proves why Plato and Aristotle so highly esteemed the profundity of the ancient mysteries. In the midst of comparative scientific ignorance, and without the aid of any modern instruments, the priest-philosophers had discovered the true fundamentals of universal dynamics. An interesting application of the Pythagorean doctrine of geometric solids, as expounded by Plato, is found in the Canon. Nearly all the old philosophers, says its anonymous author, devised a harmonic theory with respect to the universe, and the practice continued till the old mode of philosophizing died out. Kepler, 1596, in order to demonstrate the Platonic doctrine that the universe was formed of the 5 regular solids, proposed the following rule: the earth is a circle, the measurer of all. Round it describe a dodecahedron. The circle enclosing this will be Mars. Round Mars describe a tetrahedron. The sphere enclosing this will be Jupiter. Describe a cube round Jupiter. The sphere containing this will be Saturn. Now inscribe in the earth an icosahedron. The circle inscribed in it will be Venus. Inscribe an octahedron in Venus. The circle inscribed in it will be Mercury. Mysterium Cosmographicum, 1596. This rule cannot be taken seriously as a real statement of the proportions of the cosmos, for it bears no real resemblance to the ratios published by Copernicus in the beginning of the 16th century. Yet Kepler was very proud of his formula and said he valued it more than the electorate of Saxony. It was also approved by those 2 eminent authorities, Tycho and Galileo, who evidently understood it. Kepler himself never gives the least hint of how his precious rule is to be interpreted. Platonic astronomy was not concerned with the material constitution or arrangement of the heavenly bodies, but considered the stars and planets primarily as focal points of divine intelligence. Physical astronomy was regarded as the science of shadows, philosophical astronomy the science of realities. The Tetractys. Theon of Smyrna declares that the 10 dots or Tetractys of Pythagoras was a symbol of the greatest importance, for to the discerning mind it revealed the mystery of the universal nature. The Pythagoreans bound themselves by the following oath: by him who gave to our soul the Tetractys, which hath the fountain and root of ever-springing nature. The cube and the star. By connecting the 10 dots of the Tetractys, 9 triangles are formed. 6 of these are involved in the forming of the cube. The same triangles, when lines are properly drawn between them, also reveal the 6-pointed star with a dot in the center. Only 7 dots are used in forming the cube and the star. Kabbalistically, the 3 unused corner dots represent the threefold, invisible causal nature of the universe, while the 7 dots involved in the cube and the star are the Elohim, the spirits of the 7 creative periods. The Sabbath, or 7th day, is the central dot.